The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann Book Club with the Thom Hartmann University, and today we're reading from Threshold, the Progressive Plan to Pull America Back from the Brink. I'm reading from the preface. This is page XIII. The world right now is tottering atop three major thresholds. An environment that is so afire that it may soon no longer be able to support human life. An economic free market system that is almost entirely owned, run, and milked by a tiny fraction of 1% of us and has crashed and in many ways is burning around us. And an explosion of human flesh on the planet that has turned our species into a global petri dish just waiting for an effective agent to run amok. Four mistakes have brought us to this point, and the failure to recognize them at their deepest level will only push us faster toward total tipping points where we are thrown over the three thresholds and into disaster. All four of these mistakes are grounded in our culture, our way of thinking, our way of seeing the world, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. The first mistake is a belief that we're separate from nature. Our religions tell us that we were created by a supernatural being who is not part of this earth and not from this planet. He set us apart from all other life, and many among us, perhaps even the majority of the 6 billion of us, roughly 7 billion now, don't even believe that we are animals, but instead think we're a totally unique life form. The second mistake is a belief that an abstraction, an economic system, is divine and separate from us. This mythical so-called free market, so we believe, operates under its own divine rules and is entirely and eternally self-regulating. It is always right. The fact that worldwide it's more than 95% owned and run by fewer than 0.0000001% of us, it's just the way things are, always were, and always will be. We are here to serve the economy, this belief goes. It's not here to serve us. The third mistake is a belief that men should run the world and that women are their property. While it may seem that women's rights are well advanced and society is nearly egalitarian in the developed world, the United States, Western Europe, and Australia combined are only about a quarter of the population of the world. In India, it's still a common rural practice for men to burn their wives to death simply because it's more convenient than divorce. In many Arab countries and across much of Africa and South America, it's not uncommon for women to be murdered by their families if they dishonor the family by not going along with an arranged marriage or not being a virgin at time of marriage. Even in the first world, women are routinely excluded from positions of power in the world's largest institutions, such as the Catholic Church. This is one of our biggest mistakes, not just because it's morally deficient or because it can be biologically challenged, but because its primary result is an explosion in population. The fourth mistake is a belief that the best way to influence people is through fear rather than through the power of love, compassion, or support. We stand baffled when Palestinians in Gaza vote for a political party that has a long history of terrorist activity, somehow completely overlooking the fact that that same group has been feeding people, building schools and hospitals, and providing old age and widow pensions to people in need. We think we can threaten and bomb people into liking us and behaving in ways consistent with our best interests while ignoring their own best interests. We have come to believe that we are not our brother's keeper, that we are separate from all other humanity on the planet, and in all that, we are mistaken. Civilizations have come and gone, and those long gone vanished mostly because they despoiled their commons, allowed small elites to control their economies and governments, and lived in ways that were unsustainable. Those who survived for centuries or millennia are the ones that learned how to protect their commons, engage in non-toxic commerce and governance, and organize their cultures and lifestyles in ways that could continue in the same place and the same way down through the ages. If we don't learn the lessons of the latter, we shall face the fate of the former. And just a little bit from the first chapter. This is titled Darfur, and on the border with Darfur, Sudan, March 16th, 2008. It's late morning, and I'm sitting on the dirt ground typing it into an old AA battery-operated pocket word processor, a Zorus ZR5000, in part because the nearest electricity is over 500 miles away. So is the nearest paved road and the nearest building made with anything other than mud or grass. This is Gok Machar, southern Sudan, just a few miles from the border with Darfur, a village that's swelled from 8,000 people to more than 45,000 as refugees flee the bombings and murders take place as I type these words just 50 miles to the northwest. About 300 people arrived just this morning, most with nothing more than the clothes they were wearing, many with stories of relatives who died along the way as they fled or before the UN could transport them here. When we first arrived on the African continent, we looked out onto the nighttime savannah beyond our Nairobi hotel, and it was truly a startling sight, one I'd almost forgotten since my last visit to Kenya back in 1982. The landscape is huge, horizon to horizon, like the movies you see of these parts of Africa. The land here in South Sudan is just as vast and flat. The 45,000 people around me share one single hand-pumped well, drilled a decade ago by the UN, and no other infrastructure beyond that. No buildings, no roads, no septic tank or sewer system, no schools, no clinics, no hospitals, no stores, or even storehouses. Nothing. The book is Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. As Senate offices, Casey Quinlan writing over at Think Progress, as Senate offices are overwhelmed with calls against DeVos, supporters resort to shady tactics. This is fascinating. Betsy DeVos, the vote's probably going to happen today. And apparently a group, first of all, the Koch brothers group, the Libra Initiative, is promoting Betsy DeVos on Twitter and other venues. And apparently one of the organizations that DeVos helped fund was actually paying people to call their members of Congress. It's someone is paying sites to pay Americans to go to supportdevos.com, a website run by the American Federation of Children, which was formerly led by DeVos, and voice their support for the nomination, according to Jezebel's The Slot. So this is interesting. Meanwhile, Catherine Fritz, a woman in Philadelphia, set up a GoFundMe page to buy Pat Toomey's vote. He's a Republican from Pennsylvania. Betsy DeVos has given him tens of thousands of dollars. They're trying to raise more money than DeVos gave him since Pat Toomey's a Republican, so his vote's for sale. I mean, that's just kind of a given. The same thing is happening with another GoFundMe page to buy the vote of Richard Burr, the senator from is it North Carolina, South Carolina, one of the Carolinas anyway. I think it's North Carolina. So there's that. Other things in the news that I think are really consequential, and frankly, you know, this is the rant that I really wanted to start the day with. You know, you look at this U.S. government program designed to counter violent ideologies. It's called the Countering Violent Extremism, or CVE program. It was put into place sometime between Bush and Obama. And Trump, and they keep an eye on, you know, Muslim extremists, but they also keep an eye on right-wing white Christian extremists. And Trump wants to end that part of that, okay? So just put that in your brain for a minute. Then similarly, he posts, Donald Trump himself posted a false news report on his Facebook page. He got thousands of shares. That's the headline over at BuzzFeed. The tweet from Donald Trump, the real Donald Trump: Kuwait issues its own Trump-esque visa ban for Muslim-majority countries. And Trump is praising this. Turns out it ain't true. Kuwait, at Reuters, Kuwait denies it imposed travel ban praised by Trump. In other words, Donald Trump is promoting fake news on his Facebook page. So why would he promote this fake news? Well, it supports his concept of, oh my God, we've got to look out for the Muslims, right? We've got a group of bad guys that we can point at. So what happens when you get a group of bad guys that you can point at? Well, you can ride that to incredible power. This is from Die Zeit, which would be, Time, right? This is the German version of Time magazine functionally. It's by Volker Ulrich. It was published just in the last couple of days. The translation is by Thomas Rogers from the German. Lassen Sie Deutsch, diesen Text auf Deutsch. You can click here to see the text in Deutsch, in German. But this is in English. Is there a reason to worry? No, thought Nicholas Zivenking, an employee at Hamburg's World Economy Archive. This was on January 30th, 1933, he wrote this. This was, right after Hitler was elevated to chancellor. He said, he wrote this in his diary, I find the act of viewing Hitler's chancellorship as a sensational event to be childish enough that I will leave that to his loyal followers. And Volker Ulrich writes, many Germans didn't initially recognize this date as a dramatic turning point. This despite the fact that Hitler had plainly explained in Mein Kampf and countless speeches before 1933 exactly what he wanted to do when he had power: to abolish the democratic system of Weimar Germany, to eradicate Marxism, by which he meant both social democracy and communism, and to remove the Jews from Germany. As for foreign policy, it made no secret of the fact that he wanted to revise the Treaty of Versailles and that his long-term goal was conquering Lebensraum, this is, extra space for the German people, living room, in the East. And then it goes on to note German President Paul von Hindenburg had, put Hitler into power, and Ulrich writes, as for the rest of Hitler's stated intentions, his conservative coalition partners were inclined to dismiss them as mere rhetoric. Just listen to this. This is shocking. Once he was in power, they argued, he would become more reasonable. They also believed they had framed in Hitler in a way that would enable his ambitions for power and dynamics for his movement to be kept in check. What do you want? Vice Chancellor Papen asked critics. I have the confidence of Hindenburg. In 2 months, we'll have pushed Hitler so far into the corner that he'll squeal. Hitler's now in power, right? 9 conservative ministers in the so-called Cabinet of National Concentration, 3 Nazis, 9 conservatives. And everybody's saying, oh, don't worry, those conservatives, they'll check Hitler. Don't worry, that Mike Pence, he's going to keep him in, media mogul Alfred Hugenberg was seen as the strong man in the cabinet. Big business representatives shared the same illusion. In an editorial in the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, which had close ties to heavy industry, editor-in-chief Fritz Klein wrote that working together with the Nazis would be difficult and exhausting, but the people had to dare to take the leap into darkness because the Hitler movement had become the strongest political actor in Germany. The head of the Nazi party would now have to prove whether he really had what is needed in order to become a statesman. The stock market, Ulrich writes, didn't seem spooked either. People were waiting to see what would happen. Harry Graf Kessler, the diplomat, argued Hitler must have noticed by now that he has fallen prey to a deception. He is bound hand and foot to this government, and he can neither move forward nor backward. In other words, don't worry, our institutions are strong. They're going to restrain him. The big liberal newspapers also argued that nothing truly terrible would happen. Theodor Wolff, the editor-in-chief of the Berliner Tagesblatt, this is the Berlin Daily News, he said there was a border that violence would not cross. The German people, who were always proud of the freedom of thought and speech, would create a soulful and intellectual resistance and stifle all attempts by Hitler to establish a dictatorship. The Frankfurter Zeitung, this is the newspaper of Frankfurt, politics editor Benno Reifenberg expressed doubt Hitler had the social competence for the office of chancellor. He said,
It's a hopeless misjudgment of our country to believe a dictatorial regime could be forced upon it. The diversity of the German people demands democracy, he said. The Social Democrats on the left, they said every attempt by the new government to damage the Constitution will be met with the most extreme resistance of the working class and all elements of the population who love freedom. They weren't all that worried. Even the Communist Party of Germany. This was, Ulrich calls this a misjudgment. Their call for a general strike against the fascist dictatorship of Hitler. Ulrich writes, given that there were 6 million unemployed people in Germany at the time, few had the desire to go on strike. In the parliament, the unions were saying, organization, not demonstration. That is the word of the hour. Theodor Leipart, the head of the General German Trade Union, said on January 31st, this is the day after, 2 days after Hitler was elevated to power. In Zeit Online, Ulrich writes, the fact that Hitler's appointment meant that a fanatical anti-Semite, by the way, remember the tweets by Donald Trump in which he called out Jon Stewart for having changed his name from a very Jewish-sounding name to Stewart, which is a very Anglo-sounding name? I think it was a few years ago. It should cause us all to pause and go, really? The fact that Hitler's appointment meant that a fanatical anti-Semite had come to power should have made German Jews above all nervous, but that was not the case at all. In a statement on January 30th, the chair of the Central Association of German Citizens of Jewish Faith said, quote, in general, today, more than ever, we must follow the directive, wait calmly. There's no reason to doubt Hitler's sense of justice and loyalty to the Constitution. Nobody would dare to touch our constitutional rights, wrote the chair of the Central Association of German Citizens of Jewish Faith. There are powers still awake in German people who will rear up against barbarian anti-Jewish policies. The American Consul General in Berlin, George Messerschmitt, he said this represents a transitional phenomenon on the road to a more stable political situation. The British ambassador, Horace Rumbold, recommended that the Foreign Office should take a wait-and-see attitude toward the new Hitler government. French Ambassador Henri-François Poncet suggested his government remain calm and wait for further developments. When he met Hitler, he was relieved. The new chancellor seemed dull and mediocre. The Swiss envoy, Paul Dineshert, he said heads were shaken. How long can this last? And then the last paragraph of this brilliant article over at zeit.de, zeit.de, which is DE is a German website. And the head of the article, Wait Calmly, by Volker Ulrich, Ullrich. Hitler needed only 5 months to establish his power. By the summer of 1933, fundamental rights and the Constitution had been suspended. The states had been forced into conformity. The unions crushed. The political parties banned or dissolved. Press and radio brought into line, and the Jews stripped of their equality under the law. That's a quote from Ulrich's piece. What I would add is that what facilitated that was this false flag operation, the burning of the Reichstag, the burning of the Parliament building by Marius van der Lubbe, who was basically maneuvered into position by the Nazis to do it. So now with the Trump administration and Steve Bannon being a big fan of the fourth turning, and we've talked about that before, about the fourth turning, not Bannon. But now, basically, it seems to many people that the trumpets are doing, they're basically poking as hard as they can. Come on, you radical Muslims, come on, we need our 9/11. It was really useful for George W. Bush. He was able to declare a war on Iraq. He was able to get Dick Cheney's company out of bankruptcy, Halliburton. He was able to declare a war in Afghanistan. He was able to become a wartime president, so he got himself reelected to a second term. Wouldn't it be a fine thing to consolidate power if some god-awful thing were to happen in the United States? Frankly, the rest of us don't think it would be a fine thing at all. It would be a very dangerous thing. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Monday. I also want to talk about anxiety around all this. We'll be back with that in just a minute. welcome back. Where's my mouse? There it is. Jesse in Miami, Florida. Hey, Jesse, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Wow, a good topic to start off with, but I'm going to just go just a little bit off. The capitalism, okay, you just talked about what could tear this country apart. I want to talk about what could keep us together if it does happen. Okay. Capitalism, do you consider it as a form of slavery in terms of the workers are like temporary rent slaves because they lose total control to the boss?
Yeah. Corporations are functionally kingdoms. It's a feudal system, F-E-U-D-A-L, not F-U-T-I-L-E. And, the corporation is based in form, in large part, on the old kingdoms. And many of those kingdoms, basically, serfs were functionally slaves. They were the property of the feudal lord. So I think you could argue that you could use that language successfully. On the other hand, I would say that, there's capitalism and then there's capitalism. There's unregulated capitalism, which produces the outcomes that you're documenting, Jesse, and that's the stuff that the Koch brothers and frankly Donald Trump are calling for. He's deregulating the banks, deregulating the pharmaceutical industry, deregulating he just basically wants the oil industry. Basically wants to deregulate everything, and particularly big polluters, like Koch Industries, and so surprise, surprise. Unregulated capitalism produces that result. On the other hand, regulated capitalism can function fairly well for a country. We had highly regulated capitalism from 1935 until 1982, and it worked quite well. So
I disagree, though, because even with regulated capitalism, you still got that slave issue. And there's no equality between the boss.
Well, the balance for that is Jesse, is unions.
Guy who comes along and say, "Well, I didn't invent the wheel, but you may have invented the wheel. But does all the wheels just created? Do you need to get royalty because you came up with the original idea? That's not right."
Well, and nobody ever comes up with an original idea. Everybody's building on somebody else's ideas, and now we're wandering into how corrupted and how our patent and copyright laws have basically become government guarantees of wealth. They become welfare systems for people like Bill Gates.
Well, we need to get rid of it because how can you?
But my point is that regulating capitalism isn't just a government function. The other half of it is unions. If you've got strong unions, they'll hold capitalism in check too. For example, in Germany, any company that has more than 1,000 employees, and this is in their constitution, is required to have half of the seats on their board of directors filled by members of the union within that company, workers. So, that's a way of regulating capitalism as well that works fairly well. So I'm not, I don't think we're ever going to kill off capitalism altogether. I'm not even sure it's a good idea. But I think that offering a wide variety of alternatives to it, Richard Wolff talks about the cooperative model. I end my book Threshold, the last chapter is all about co-ops. Also, Rebooting the American Dream, the last chapter is about co-ops. There's, worker-owned businesses. I mean, there's lots of opportunities out there and lots of potentials. So, anyhow, Jesse, an important topic. Thanks for the call. We'll be back in just a moment. So let me lay down a couple of questions for you. The first is, do you think that I'm being hyperbolic, even talking about Hitler? Am I exaggerating? Am I hysterical? Am I, seeing things that aren't there? I don't know. I was talking about Hitler back in 2003 when George W. Bush was exploiting the 9/11 tragedy. I wrote a piece for Common Dreams about how this is not all that different from what Hitler did with the Reichstag being burned. And I still think it wasn't. I think that this path to authoritarianism, let's say, not using the F word, the fascism word, But this path toward authoritarianism is not, it's not moving as rapidly as it did in Germany in 1933, but it's been moving at least since 2001 and arguably since the 80s. So number one, do you think that I'm like over the edge? And number two, how do you deal with this? I mean, this is serious stuff, right? Thinking that your country is about to, I mean, it's serious stuff for all of us. Among the first people that the Nazis went after were the liberal commentators. So, I'm sitting around wondering, okay, when are they coming for me? It's, what do you do about that? Or will they not? I don't know. We'll see. And number two, how to deal with the anxiety around this. A new study, this is from studyfinds.org. And the headline is No Meds Needed. Study finds doing this eases anxiety. It's by Charles Hartwell. He says, new study finds the best treatment for anxiety may not come from your local pharmacy, but rather a quiet room in your home. The study published in the January 24 edition of Psychiatry Research confirmed that 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation can be crucially beneficial for those who suffer from anxiety. The researchers reported that a mindfulness meditation routine, this was, by the way, a controlled study. They had a placebo group and a meditator group. The mindfulness meditation routine resulted in a decrease of stress-related hormones and cell signaling proteins when performing the speech after the experiment. Patients in the control group, these are the people who did not meditate, they were taught relaxation techniques, but not meditation, not mindfulness meditation. Patients in the control group showed their anxiety actually worsened. So how do you do mindfulness meditation? Mindfulness meditation is essentially noticing your noticing, right? Noticing what's going on within you, noticing what's going on around you, and noticing how you're reacting to it. It requires a very small dissociation, a stepping back from yourself. Ouspensky was probably, in my opinion, I mean, he's the guy who influenced me the most. I was 19 when I read The Third Way and Tertium Organatum and In Search of the Miraculous. In Search of the Miraculous was the best of P.D. Ouspensky's books. And he was a student of Gurdjieff, and Gurdjieff, and Ouspensky lays this technique out brilliantly in the Third Way or the Fourth Way. Maybe it's the Fourth Way, whatever, in one of his books, that Way book, where he talks about setting yourself behind the back of your head and looking down into your mind and looking through your eyes and noticing everything that you're thinking. You go, there's a thought. Oh, there's a fear. Oh, there's a hope. There's a fantasy. Look at that. And just kind of noticing every thought and constantly stepping back and noticing while you just sit there quietly for 10 minutes, wherever you are. Doesn't require a posture, doesn't require fancy breathing exercises, doesn't require anything. You can do this sitting on the train, you can do it sitting on the bus, you can do it driving down the street. Although probably it's best to attend to the road. This is something that's very, very straightforward.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So all kinds of good stuff today. And also, if you want to call the Senate and ask Pat Toomey or Richard Burr to vote no on Betsy DeVos, it's 202-456-1111. Carrie in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Carrie, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
I was wondering, I've been listening to you for about a year and love your program so much and have been inspired to become more active in my local politics.
Cool.
And, thanks, because it's really, I was hoping it would be more rewarding, but I went to my first city council meeting on Monday for a really big resolution that the City Council of Seattle is looking at to build a new police precinct in the North End. That's going to cost the city $149 million.
Wow.
Yeah. And least to say, there was a lot of movement against it from the community. There was about 150 to 200 of us there against the city doing that. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. You know, Seattle has, in the past 5 to 10 years, has had a homeless explosion. We have, the last count was like about 4,000 people living on the streets, a lot of them families with children, and we just think it's a misuse of funds. We went there, and people spoke for over an hour telling the personal stories. Actual people who were homeless came and spoke, you know, really moving things that brought me to tears personally as a human being, listening to these stories of real life and how policies have affected these people. And we didn't get out of a council of 8 people, only one of the council members changed their position. Only one.
Was that Shama Sawant?
Pardon me?
Was that Shama Sawant?
She was gone. So they really conveniently had the vote when she was gone in India. Mike O'Brien was the only one. He went into the meeting saying he was going to, you know, support the resolution to build the precinct. And then he by the end, he actually heard us and was like, you know, I think we should put a hold on this for about 4 weeks so the community can ask more questions. We can engage the community, find out what their concerns are. It seems like there's a lot of religious.
Were you arguing, Carrie, that money, there's nothing wrong with appropriating the money, but let's use it for homeless people instead of police? Or were you arguing that the police are not necessary there? I mean, I'm not sure I understand exactly what the argument was.
The argument was that is way too much money to spend on a police station when the money could be appropriated to more social services that are needed, as well as I think a lot of people's thoughts were that putting money into policing, furthering policing, the building that they're trying to build is going to be way bigger, way more expensive than any police station in the country to hold a lot of militaristic weapons. They're going to do a lot of training for the whole region in there. And, you know, the community doesn't want that. We don't want our police more militarized. We don't want more police. We want more social services because poverty, the crime happens because of poverty. And if we can actually alleviate poverty, that will help, you know, presumably.
Yeah, no, I get the logic. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
So, and it was just, so I guess my question to you is, if someone wants to become involved, I mean, I was so disappointed when I left that out of 8 people, only one of them really was even affected by an hour and a half of people. And like hundreds of people were there. I mean, it got really rowdy. It was actually pretty intense meeting. Yeah. And it was like our voices were still, we were still silenced.
What I would say, Carrie, is persist. In November of 1873, Susan B. Anthony went to a polling place where it was illegal for women to vote and voted. And in December, she was arrested. And in March or April of the following year, she was convicted of the crime of voting while female. She devoted her life to women's suffrage, to the right of women to vote. And she died before it ever happened. But that didn't stop her from continually coming back and coming back and coming back and fighting for what she knew was right and fighting for what she knew was right. Sometimes these things take time. It takes time to build a critical mass. It takes time to get the word out. You don't win every battle. In fact, you typically lose most of them or compromise most of them. But don't give up. Please. Okay. Please. Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't want to give up at all, but I appreciate you taking my call and giving me those words of encouragement because I needed it. I needed it after that.
No struggle happens just because a bunch of people show up and say, hey, we're here and we think this way, and all the politicians just go, oh, okay. It takes more than that, and I mean it's an important thing, and it's a vital start, and I'm assuming that there was some good community organizing that got those people to that city council meeting, that got you to that city council meeting, and that you played a role in that. So take that group, take that community organizing that's been done,
and start expanding it, start growing it, start looking for people to replace the members of the city council who are not voting the way that you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is interesting. You know, Kellyanne Conway is saying that when she said the Bowling Green massacre, she meant to say the Bowling Green whatever, terrorists, and that it was just an honest mistake. Well, Cosmo, you know, Cosmopolitan, the magazine, they're reporting that they did an interview with her 3 days before she said that to Chris Matthews on MSNBC, and she said virtually the exact same thing. This is what she said to Cosmo. She said, he did that because 2 Iraqi nationals came to this country, joined ISIS, traveled back to the Middle East to get trained and refine the terrorism skills, and came back here and were the masterminds behind the Bowling Green massacre of taking innocent soldiers' lives away. End of quote. Really? So it wasn't just, oops. Very interesting. Sarah Rose? How do you say your name in Laguna Beach, California?
Hello?
Hi.
Yes.
Your name is?
Hi. Get you a speaker. Hello.
Hi. How do you say your name?
Sarah Rose. Sararos.
Oh, two words. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So,
hi.
Sarah Rose, what's up?
Yes. I wanted to share. I was kind of preparing to different things to research in our history to prepare ourselves for what may happen in our future. And the Underground Railroad, the rise of fascism, and then I've just recently discovered the Weimar Republic, Weimar.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, it's actually spelled with a W. It's pronounced as a V in German.
W, that's what I meant, yes.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time I'm calling somewhere, so I'm a little
that's
nervous,
fine, Sarah Rose.
The spelling thing. But so I was just wondering if you see similarities in the Weimar Republic and what is going on now. And actually, there's cinema, too. Highly recommend for your audience to check out the movies that were produced at that time. They really seem to...
Yeah. If you really want to see an amazing amount of video or an amazing piece of video that will tell you what the Nazis were all about, watch Leni Riefenstahl's movie, The Triumph of the Will. It was made out of the 1937 Nuremberg rally, and it is widely acknowledged as one of the most brilliant pieces of documentary filmmaking ever made. It was also a giant advertisement. In fact, Hitler ordered that movie be played before and after every movie in Germany from the time it came out in 1938 until the end of the war. It was everywhere. It was amazing. Sarah Rose, I got to move along, but thank you for the suggestions. Joe in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to SiriusXM.
Let me take you off speaker, Tom.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. I watched a show. They had a series on Hitler on Saturday on AHC, and I was amazed at the similarities and personalities of Hitler and Trump. I thought they were talking about Trump.
Wow.
It was amazing, the similarities.
Well, Hitler was thin-skinned. He didn't take criticism well. He hated his enemies. He lived in a fact-free world. He was convinced that, the source of all evil was the Jews and the communists.
He had a desire to be loved by everybody.
Yep.
The similarities were just amazing.
Wow.
If anybody could watch that series, I'd love for him to do it.
And that was what, National Geographic or History Channel or what?
American History Channel.
The American History Channel.
Yeah, AHC.
AHC. Okay, cool. Joe, thanks for the tip. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I wanted to share my thoughts about this immigration ban.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I believe that it's just indicative that we are definitely in an illiberal, ethno-nationalist state. And we're in the outcome of that is the hybrid regime. And let me tell you what. My conservative friends, they keep saying the same thing. They keep saying, ha, you liberals, this is funny. The law is clear. The president has broad, sweeping authority on this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I decided to look up, 8/11/82, the statutory law that they're quoting, right?
Right.
Just like I did with the FISA Act, just like I did with General Mattis's appointment. And these statutory regulations or statutory laws are really being interpreted to benefit the executive branch in almost every case.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's the corporate influence on our legislative body, which goes back to my original point. Is I think we're in the hybrid regime now. And as far as Trump, not being able to articulate clearly that the United States is, more ethical than Russia, I think that's another sign of it. Yeah. Because, really that's what should be a softball question for you.
Well, Dave, there was a piece to that everybody is missing. And I think that it's being intentionally overlooked by the media, because basically what Donald Trump said was George W. Bush was a killer too. He killed 100,000 people at least in Iraq and thousands of American soldiers. Now, those weren't his exact words, but listen to this clip, Dave, all the way to the end. See, in the corporate media, they almost never play this all the way to the end, because it's an indictment of it's Donald Trump indicting George Bush, which, by the way, he did this in the Republican primaries. He said Bush was the worst president ever. The war in Iraq was a horrible mistake, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we all know that he was on Howard Stern's show in 2002 promoting the war in Iraq. So he's trying to rewrite history about his position on this. But nonetheless, just listen to this. Here's what he had to say.
He's a killer, though. Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done, too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different than...
We made a lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So a lot of killers around, believe me.
A lot of people were killed in Iraq. A lot of killers around, right? I think he's talking about the Bush administration, Dave.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But nobody's pointing that out. Nobody's pointing that out. Instead, everybody's horrified that, it's a moral equivalence with Putin. Whether he was saying that or not, I don't know. He might have been. But George W. Bush really should be held to account for lying us into a war with Iraq, just like Lyndon Johnson should have been held to account for lying us into a war with Vietnam.
Yeah, and let me just say this real quick. I mean, Trump is entitled to his own opinion. I'm not trying to suppress the man's opinion. But why doesn't he why doesn't he deflect the question about Russia by saying, it's apples and oranges?
Right.
I mean, he could do something easy like that. But, and then not compromise his personal opinion if he likes Putin.
Well, I think it's because, he's looking at keep in mind, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we sent a bunch of Chicago school economists over, the Milton Friedman School, to help, Boris Yeltsin put together his new country, basically. And they advised him to basically go libertarian, go unregulated capitalism, which is what, to a large extent, Russia has done. Well, unregulated capitalism typically produces oligarchs and strongman kind of regimes, as it were. And I think that's what Donald Trump is trying to create here in the United States right now. They're trying to deregulate capitalism left and right, and he's trying to play the role of the strong leader that Vladimir Putin plays very well in Russia. So I think you're right. He could have said it's apples and oranges, and instead he said, no, we're going down that same road, and that should cause a lot of Americans to pause and say, did I just hear that? Really? But on the other hand, there's also that indictment of George W. Bush in there, which I think is consequential. Dave, thanks for the call. Jill in Fort Lauderdale. Hey, Jill, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to say that I'm so happy that you are really the one person that is comparing what's going on to Hitler, and you've been bringing this up, excuse me, on a daily basis, and reading about what happened and how everyone was like, yeah, it's okay, everything's going to be fine. This guy's not going to do this, and they're not going to do that. From before Trump came into power, I had been discussing this with my entire family, my husband, and saying, oh, my God, we need to get some passports just in case, because we're Jewish. And this guy with Steve Bannon, he's a total anti-Semite, and I'm frightened. And how quickly is this going to go? And I hadn't realized that it only took 5 months, like you said today, from the time Hitler came into power, that it was that quick.
Yeah.
So
Well, there was a national emergency in there. There was the equivalent of a 9/11 event in there. I mean, look at how quickly George W. Bush changed our country. We didn't torture people.
It was horrifying.
And within a year, we were torturing people. We didn't have black sites, and within a year, we had black sites. We weren't bombing other countries that didn't do anything to us, and within a year, we were bombing 2 of them. I mean,
I feel like we're going down that road, but I also feel that, like, the lady from Germany, for some reason, is escaping my
Hannah
brain.
Arendt?
She's the one person that seems to make any sense out of this. What's going on in Germany now with the right? That they're being allowed to say these horrible, hateful.
Oh, you mean Angela Merkel, the chancellor?
I don't know how that went on my head. Anyway, we are definitely on that path. People are in denial all the time. Oh no, we have this Constitution. We're fine. We've been over, it's over 200 years. We're good. We're good. We're not good. We're never good. This is the first time that people are participating in our democracy. I've always participated, but even more so, I've been trying to make more of a huge effort to make the calls to the senators, and finding every time I call that the lines are busy, and you can't leave a message because.
Yeah. Jill, we're out of time, but thank you for the call, and thanks for listening seriously. I got to tell you about John Yoo, too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
We'll be back with my rant on John Yoo and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Jackie, watching Free Speech TV in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. This isn't what I was calling about, but I agree. I don't think you're exaggerating at all about this comparison to Hitler. And I got the book They Thought They Were Free by Milton Meyer, and I'm about halfway through, and it says Hitler talked always against the government, against the lost war, against the peace treaty, against unemployment, and so on and so on. So we are in trying times.
It was right-wing populism. That's what Hitler was. That's how he rose to power, was via right-wing populism.
The reason I called was because in Seattle here, the Seattle Times is cutting newsroom jobs. Newsroom employment will be laying off 23 people, reporters, desk editors, news page designers, and also our local TV station, Como, which is owned by Sinclair. They are laying off veteran reporters, including the investigative reporting team. And so that's bad. But I also wanted to say I just got back from a trip to the Midwest. I wore my pussy hat the whole time, and on the way back I had a sign taped to my suitcase about the wall and the ban and all that stuff. And people were coming up to me left and right just saying, talking and supporting me. And I think people should just wear their pussy hats at all times.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you found in the Rust Belt, in quote Trump country, end quote, that there's a lot of concern about Trump?
Oh my gosh. I went to northern Iowa, and people up there are just up in arms in my little community of 2,000 people. And I was so proud because they were even talking about our attorney general here in Washington and the judge who stood up against the immigrant ban. And it's not happy campers there.
Yeah, that's reassuring. That's very reassuring. Jackie, the media, which newspaper is cutting their investigative reporting?
The Seattle Times.
Seriously, do you know who owns that?
The Seattle Times is privately owned. Let's see here. I do know. Let me see. They are owned.
Do you know if this is a result?
Frank Bletham, Seattle Times publisher Frank Blethen, who represents the fourth generation of family ownership over a 120-year history.
That's interesting. I wonder if the paper is doing this because they're losing money on subscriptions and they have competition on the internet, or if they're doing it because, you know, there's some kind of ideology at work. Do you have any?
Well, I think it's probably, you know, the internet and all that stuff.
Yeah, it is hurting a lot of newspapers really badly. Jackie, thanks for the call and thanks for the hint, the update, the information. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So when George W. Bush wanted to torture people, and, you know, he was doing his whole be afraid, you know, and I'm afraid thing, which has been brought back by the Trump administration, you know, administration by fear. When George W. Bush was doing this, he needed a legal rationale for it. He needed a legal basis for it. So he had these two lawyers, Jay Bybee and John Yoo, who basically wrote legal opinions saying, yes, it's just fine to torture people. You know, one of them, in fact, in testimony before Congress said, you know, crushing a child's testicles in front of his father is an acceptable form of interrogation. Not of the child, but of the father. I mean, for example, so John Yoo writes an op-ed in today's New York Times saying, I was the guy who was in favor of torture. He calls it enhanced interrogation. I was the guy who was in favor of the black sites. I was the guy who was in favor of Guantanamo. And Trump has gone too far for me. And, you know, which is astonishing because, you know, I've been sitting around saying for years that, you know, John Yoo and Jay Bybee themselves should be answering for these crimes. Jay Bybee was put on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He's a federal judge for the rest of his life. And John Yoo is a professor at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley. But when basically the fascists come out and say, no, it's too fascist, I think you should take it seriously. On the front page of today's New York Times, or at least the online version. Tom in Stacy, Minnesota. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It's my first time calling in. I've been watching the show for about 6 months.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think your concern is a little too great about Trump until the judges and the courts and in other words the legal branch of the country gives in. Because with Hitler, it was what they also insist on everything being legal, and as you know, he appointed the judges, and the judges started to implement the laws that executed people. And they even used to quote, I remember the movie The Trial of Nuremberg is probably the clearest picture of what was going on inside Germany to keep this guy legitimate in the minds of the people.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you, I missed the name of that other movie that you talked about that was done in Germany and ran after every
Triumph
movie
of the Will.
What is it?
Triumph of the Will by Leni, L-E-N-I, Riefenstahl, R-E-I-F-E-N-S-T-A-H-L. And you can watch it. Actually, you can see it. There's copies of it up on YouTube. I'm guessing that it's probably on Netflix, although, you know, because it's just a classic. It's, you know, the two movies that I think every American should watch if they want to understand the role of right-wing extremism in history, how it has altered history, are Triumph of the Will and Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation, of course, was in 1915. It was the first feature-length movie played in the United States in history, and it was the recruiting, it became the recruiting thing for the Klan for years.
And Woodrow Wilson played it repeatedly in the White House for people. And it basically just, it reinvented. It was an alternative history of Reconstruction, basically, and of the Klan. And it revived the Klan. And there's a great piece about, I think it's in Slate magazine today, or over the weekend, actually, I saw it. There was about how Trump is rising to power on an alternative history. He's talking about crime, and we need to be the law and order administration, just like Nixon said. But the peak of our crime rate was 1991. Crime has been steadily declining ever since. And and he's got these kind of alternative histories. Now, that's not to say that the economic stuff isn't very real. And this is where I think the Democrats have just really had a problem, is not acknowledging the damage that neoliberal free trade policies have done, have wreaked on much of the United States. But and Trump has his finger on that. I get that. Just like Hitler had his finger on the anxiety, the economic anxiety that people had as a result of Germany having lost World War I and having to repay all these nations through the Treaty of Versailles. It was
so I guess as an American citizen, the one thing I want to see is the economy get stronger and stay as strong as it is now or better, because then the argument that Trump could put forward about creating a better America would be dust. It'd be in the dust.
Yeah, except that's not going to happen in 3 years. I mean, even if he were to blow up all our trade deals and remove all the incentives to offshore jobs and provide incentives to bring jobs back to the United States, it's still going to take a decade to undo 5 decades of neoliberalism, or 4 solid decades of it anyway. So, that's not going to help. And the fact that the Republicans were filibustering and blocking federal judgeship appointments to the point that, some mind-boggling number of federal judges are still waiting, for appointments. And because they were waiting for a Republican president to do that, Donald Trump is now in a position to essentially completely stack the judiciary. More than half of all federal judges right now are appointees of Republican administrations. And that number is probably going to go up to something like 2/3 as a consequence of this. So there's some serious stuff here. Tom, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Christopher in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Christopher, we got a minute to the break, to the end of the hour. What's up? Christopher? Yeah, you're on the air.
Is that me?
Yeah, you got to listen to your phone, not your whatever it is.
Hi, what's up, man? My name is Christopher Michael Escobedo, man. How you doing?
Good. We've got about a half a minute. Quick point.
What was that? Okay, I'm talking about Mexican reparations, man. Well, deportation, mass deportation of the Mexicans in the 1930s.
In the 1930s?
Yes.
Huh.
In the 1930s, they sent about 350,000 to 200 million Mexican and Mexican Americans. About 60% of them were American citizens.
You mean 2 million?
Yeah. Between 350,000 and 2 million.
Right.
Were sent back to Mexico.
I'll have to look that up. I know that I knew that there were deportations prior to.
So I seen that on YouTube. It was a YouTube just now. I just watched it about Mexican reparations. So
Yeah.
you can probably find it on YouTube.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then
I'll have to check it out.
CBS saying about 60% of them were American citizens.
Wow.
And my biggest issue is my family's from Texas, and I'm up here in Washington, safe and sound.
Yeah.
And I thought, since they're Mexican Americans like me, I figured they were on the same side as me. Come to find out, they all voted for Trump.
Oh, my God. Christopher, I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from ADD Success Stories, a guide for fulfillment to fulfillment for families with attention deficit disorder. And it's really individuals as well. And mostly the book is well over 100 individual stories about ways that people have learned how to be successful in life and just sharing them with others. A lot of these came from when I ran the ADD forum on CompuServe, and a lot of these are, other people's stories from CompuServe, some of them from when Louise was coaching, when we were running the community for ADHD kids, all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, this is from chapter 5, page 47, titled Learning How to Handle Criticism and Self-Criticism. And it opens with a quote from Benjamin Disraeli in 1860. He said, "It's much easier to be critical than to be correct." One of the most common and recurring strategies that successful hunters, that's people with ADD, tell about is how they've learned to handle criticism. A successful ADD entrepreneur tells the story of how devastated he was in a high school presentation that he'd spent the better part of 2 months on for English class. He read dozens of books, dug out arcane facts, sifted through quotes and stories and information, all to find what he thought was the absolutely perfect summary to make his point. With great enthusiasm, he pulled an all-nighter, writing the final paper, and marched off to school the next day with his head high and the smell of academic victory in his nostrils. At 2 o'clock, he walked into his English classroom and marched up to the teacher's desk, a paper in his hand. "Here it is," he said, and handed it to her with a dramatic flourish. She took one glance at it, leaned over the side of the desk, and dropped it into the wastebasket. "You didn't double spaces," she said. "When are you going to learn to read the directions?" Stunned, he began to protest. To tell her about the hours of work he'd done, she shook her head as if shaking his words out of her ears and interrupted him, saying, "You have to learn how to do things right. This will be a good lesson for you. I'm giving you an F for that paper, and there's no appeal because today was the last day you could hand it in." He went home that night and at the ripe old age of 14 cried himself to sleep. "I learned 2 important lessons from that experience," he told me 20 years later. The first was that I needed to slow down to force myself to read directions. In that regard, it was probably a positive experience. But it also almost destroyed my commitment to her, to the class, to the school, and to any future academic achievement. And that was where I learned my second and most important lesson. When you fall down, stand back up, dust yourself off, and carry on. That sounds easy, I said, but how do you do it? How do you go from being angry about her, from blaming her, or for that matter, from blaming yourself? "I have a picture in my mind," he said, "of a man who's walking down a dusty rural road. He trips on a stone and falls face first into the dirt. Then he reaches over to the side of the road, grabs a stick, and begins to beat himself over the head with a stick, yelling at himself about how stupid he was to trip and fall. Between these comments, he's cursing the stone for being there and blaming it for tripping him. That's absurd, isn't it? But that's just what many people do. And when I imagine that picture and I see how absurd it is to wallow in self-blame, I feel empowered to get on with my life." End of quote. Unfortunately, the absurd behavior that this entrepreneur described is just what so many people do, particularly those who've spent their lives feeling like they've never quite lived up to their potential. They respond to criticism first by blaming the critic and then by beating themselves up. They rationalize the former by taking a debating position, finding flaws in the criticism or the critic, and then rationalize the latter by telling themselves that if they beat themselves up emotionally, they'll learn from the experience. In real life, it rarely works that way. People who pursue this strategy instead just end up bruised and ineffectual, paralyzed by fear of criticism or by the damage they do to themselves in the name of lesson learning. So how can we best handle criticism? And then we go through some more stories. The first step is to examine the criticism to see if there's any truth in it. Usually there is some truth to criticism, and if we can separate out the kernel of truth from the emotional baggage associated with it, we can often learn something useful. For example, when my first book on ADD was published, one reviewer wrote a scathing and sarcastic commentary on it. While much of the commentary was off base or factually inaccurate, he did point out one real deficiency. My premise of Hunters and Farmers was based on anthropology, but I hadn't gotten the endorsement of any anthropologists or cited any anthropological texts in my bibliography. So, deciding that he had a point, I sought out people with the requisite knowledge of hunting and farming culture. I first found Will Kreinen, MD, who, while not an anthropologist, was one of the few medical doctors in the world to have spent years of his career as the physician to an indigenous hunting society, one of the last of the Native American tribes in Canada. Every year, he followed them with his small plane as they made their annual 1,000-mile trek with the caribou they hunted. He told me that when he first arrived, he found that the previous doctor had diagnosed 100% of their children with ADD and put the entire school on Ritalin. That, for me, was a pretty good validation of the hunter-farmer theory. Then I met cultural anthropologist Jay Fikes, PhD, who wrote the famous books debunking Carlos Castaneda. Dr. Fikes obtains his PhD by studying the few remaining Native American hunting societies of the American Southwest and northern Mexico. After reading my book, he wrote a ringing endorsement of it, saying that his experience taught him that hunting and agricultural societies were profoundly different, and that the individuals who make them up are profoundly different. There's a startlingly high percentage of what we would call ADD among some of the members of native hunting tribes. So that criticism of my book, as sarcastic and stinging as it was, made the book better. Anyhow, the book is ADD Success Stories, A Guide to Fulfillment for Families with Attention Deficit Disorder.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what's going on with North Dakota? It's so weird. I mean, I guess this is what happens when Republicans basically completely run a state. You've got two state representatives, Bernie Satrom and Vernon Lanning. This is from a piece by Genevieve Hatch over in the women's section of the Huffington Post today. And it says, according to Satrom, this is one of the two state representatives. They're both men, of course. Women should spend their Sunday mornings bringing their husbands breakfast in bed. He said, Sundays should be devoted to spending time with your wife, your husband, making him breakfast, bringing it to him in bed, and then after that, go take your kids for a walk. Representative Lanning says, I don't know about you, but my wife has no problem spending everything I earn in 6.5 days. And I don't think it hurts at all to have a half day off. Right. Welcome to the 1950s. Speaking of which, the vote on Betsy DeVos, well, actually, that is not the 1950s. Betsy DeVos wants to take us all the way back to the 1850s when school was optional. And you really only went to school if your parents could afford to pay for it. Or at least any kind of good school. Well, actually, any kind of school. The Senate Democrats are planning a rare all-night talkathon to protest Betsy DeVos's nomination for Education Secretary ahead of an expected vote on Tuesday, writes Jordan Harney in today's thehill.com. And the final vote is expected noon tomorrow. Richard Burr and Pat Toomey have both said that they're going to vote for Betsy DeVos. I mean, she donated money to their campaigns. Even though progressive activists have run GoFundMe sites that have actually raised more money than the money that Betsy DeVos has given to Senator Richard Burr and Senator Pat Toomey. But Senators Burr and Toomey say they're going to vote for her. So it looks like if the only two Republican defectors are Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, then there's the senators from Maine and Alaska, respectively. And I'm not sure there's any other Republican women. No, there's at least one other Republican woman senator, but in any case, they're saying no to Betsy DeVos. And so the Democrats are going to take the floor, and they're going to try and hold the floor until tomorrow. So you're going to see from the House or from the United States Senate, you're going to see Democrat after Democrat after Democrat speaking out. I got a press release this morning from Debbie Stabenow's office saying that she's going to be taking the floor at 2:45, assuming that everything works according to schedule, to speak about DeVos. And she's from Michigan, which is where DeVos is from. DeVos and her husband, this is the Amway fortune. They're both billionaires, and they basically own Republican politics in Michigan. So, and they've been doing this charter school scam in Detroit ever since the emergency manager took over, and it's just produced a mess. Meanwhile, Donald Trump wants to gut financial regulations. In fact, last week he was speaking to Jamie Dimon. He had three Wall Street banksters in the White House. And he says, I got friends who can't get a loan because all these regulations. Well, actually, the banking industry right now literally is more profitable than it has ever been. And they're loaning money. No problem. They're borrowing money from the government at 0.5%. They're loaning money out at 3%, 4%, 5%. And they're making piles of money. But they can't rip off consumers quite as aggressively as they want to do. They would like to see the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau done away with. This bureau has recovered more than $15 billion from banksters who have stolen it from people like you and me, from average people, around the country. And Trump wants to do away with the fiduciary rule as well, which says that if you're a financial advisor, you actually have to give advice that's good for the investor, rather than give advice that's only good for you, because you're handling that investor's money, and you can put it in places that pay big commissions to investment advisors, or you can put it in places that produce good returns. You can rip off your customers or not, and right now it's illegal to rip off your customers. Trump wants to do away with that rule, and in fact says he's going to. So the patriotic millionaires have come out and spoken about this. And in D.C. and across the country, this press release of the patriotic millionaires. There's literally a group of millionaires that came out of an old Democracy Alliance meeting where a bunch of these folks were together and got together and said, hey, let's do this. We've had them on this program a number of times. In D.C. and across the country, patriotic millionaires are speaking out against President Trump's first attempt to gut financial regulation by reversing the fiduciary rule and taking careful aim at Dodd-Frank. The president campaigned as a champion for working people, yet this proposal looks exactly as if it was pulled from a Wall Street policy wish list. The policy reversal will not serve regular Americans, say the patriotic millionaires. It will only serve to make it easier for big banks and financial companies to cheat their customers and once again destabilize our economy. In the words of the patriotic millionaires themselves, this is from Morris Pearl. He's a former managing director of BlackRock. He says the proposed changes will mean that taxpayers will increase profits for banks in good years and increase taxpayer bailouts for banks in bad years. If you believe that you are paying someone to help you invest your retirement savings, that he should give you advice. He says, I believe that if you are paying someone to help you invest your retirement savings, that he should give you advice that he believes is in your best interest, not simply telling you to invest in whatever generates the highest commissions for him. And there's just a whole bunch of them here saying this kind of stuff. Fascinating. Meanwhile, the Obama administration, where is the Benghazi Committee when you need it? That raid that killed a Navy SEAL and killed an American 8-year-old? I realize she was al-Awlaki's daughter, but, he's dead, as is his 16-year-old son, who was killed by a drone strike by President Obama. Now his daughter was killed, his 8-year-old daughter was killed in the SEAL team thing, where apparently the SEALs also killed 15 other women and children. And one of the SEALs died. And Trump's response to this, of course, the Republicans are not talking about it. They're not, let's have an investigation. Oh, geez, look at, Americans died. Instead, the Trump line has been, well, President Obama set this thing up. I just pulled the trigger on it.
So former deputy assistant to President Obama came out and said, this is over at groupspeak.com, G-R-O-O-P speak.com. Obama admin Trump lying about raid that killed Navy SEAL. Saying that President Obama was never briefed on this particular raid. Trump alone was responsible for it. It left 30 people dead, including at least 15 women and children. And one of the dead was an 8-year-old girl. Meanwhile, Chase Iron Eyes was arrested at the Dakota Access Pipeline. This was last week. Chase Iron Eyes and a group of approximately 40 water protectors lit a sacred fire and established the new Last Child's Camp on high ground near the Dakota Access Pipeline construction site. Later in the day, militarized police dismantled the Highway 1806 barricade and assembled at the end of the road. This evening, armed officers moved in, cleared the camp, and arrested a number of the peaceful and prayerful protesters, including Chase. And so they're asking people to point this out and also to go to Lakota Law, LAKOTALAW.org, and donate money to the Standing Rock folks, which is, in my mind, a good investment of funds. This is grim stuff. We'll have more on that. By the way, Bill Black is going to be with us in the next hour, The Economist. It's going to be fascinating. I wanted to talk about maglev trains, 90% income tax rates. Oh, and Trump has been great for the cable news business. I want to, actually, this is the rant that I want to get into right after the break, and then we'll be picking up your phone calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The perfidy of the cable news business is astonishing. I will share that with you in 5 minutes. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. What's on your mind?
I wanted to, I have a series. It's on the American Heroes channel. It's called Hitler's Bodyguard, and they were going over the Reichstag fire, and the judge in the case of the Reichstag fire actually acquitted all except van der Lubbe in the case, which infuriated the Nazis, and Hitler actually changed the law so that all treason trials would be done by special Nazi-appointed judges. So the last resistance to Nazis was the judges in that case.
Yeah.
That's when the Nazis took total control. So this is when Trump's starting attacking the judges. He's doing the same thing. And let me tell you, with all these Trump people who thought he was going to drain the swamp and he was an outsider and all this stuff, where are you now, for all you people listening, as he as the FCC that I just read today, they abandoned net neutrality. What about Stephen Mnuchin or the deregulating of Wall Street? What about Betsy DeVos, who received $200 million? Like, how is this draining the swamp with all these neocons like Frank Gaffney and all the rest of them? It's just, I hope they cry. I hope they're crying right now.
Actually, Jared, I can tell you what they're doing right now. I know some of these folks, and what they're doing is they're watching Fox News. And over at Fox News, it's a completely different United States. It's a completely different world. President Trump or so-called President Trump, I should start calling him, is fulfilling his campaign promises. He's doing what he said he would do. He's taking on those liberals. Oh, and have you noticed those awful black bloc people in Berkeley who don't want to let Milo talk? Of course, Milo's book is #1 on Amazon. Lots of coverage on Fox News. They literally live in an alternative world, Jared. They have no idea what's going on.
Well, there's two things they can't cover up, though. When the economy crashes, that's the first thing they can't cover up, when they're going to bail out the banks. And number two, they're going to stage something with Iran. There's either going to be some attack on some American ship. Yeah, right, of course. It's going to be Gulf of Tonkin, and we're going to be in Iran. And I swear, there's going to be so many dead. It's going to be horrific. It's going to be like a Holocaust there.
Well, and this is where it gets really dangerous, because one of Iran's allies is Russia, and Russia has nuclear weapons.
Well, I don't know if Russia is going to come to the defense of Iran, though, because I know Russia was hostile. It didn't like us invading Iraq, but I don't know if they would actually threaten a nuclear war over that. So I don't know if that would actually lead to a nuclear war, but I do believe that there is going to be extreme hostilities with Russia and China under the Trump regime, and we're looking at increased hostilities also on the Poland-Baltic borders as well that nobody's talking about. I mean, we're talking about Ukraine. What about the fact we have nuclear missiles pointed directly at Russia on their border? Okay.
But there's no nukes there yet. But we're talking about battlefield nukes. Yeah, Steve Cohen's been on this program a number of times talking about it, Jared, and it is a serious cause for concern. Jared, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Despite Claire Atkinson wrote this for the New York Post, and the New York Post is, oddly enough, it's a Murdoch-owned publication, typically right-wing news, and this is the only place I've seen this story. I've been looking all over for it. There's a sort of parallel story in Politico, which I'll share with you in just a moment, but this is amazing. She writes, it's official, President Trump is good for business, the cable news business. Now, we've heard Les Moonves from CBS saying, maybe terrible for America, but it's great for CBS. Keep it up, Donald. Well, it goes beyond CBS, apparently, to CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. Despite the love-hate relationship between Trump and the three big news networks, the media giants collectively boosted their ad revenue by 40% last year. That's a stunning $394 million in additional ad revenue. The three cable news networks saw the average number of viewers tuning in all day grow to 4.9 million, according to SMI. That's up 15%. Primetime audiences, typically larger, likely higher. And let's see, the CNN increased its ad revenue by 58%. Fox up 36%. MSNBC up 48%. Now, that in and of itself is pretty amazing, because, I keep saying, and I said this at Marianne Williamson's conference over the weekend, her Sister Giant conference, that basically the media a year and a half, nearly 2 years ago, the media decided that the Donald Trump reality show, POTUS version, would be good for business. And if it's good for business, that means we've got to play it. We've got to play a lot of it. Excuse me. And so they did. They played all kinds of Trump. They gave him $2 billion worth of free airtime and made him president. Our media. And now that he's president, they have figured out, this guy doesn't read, he watches television. And they figured out which shows he watches and when, based on how he tweets in response to them, among other things. And so here you see this story by Daniel Lippman and Anna Palmer over at Politico. The headline basically says it all. TV networks hiking ad rates for shows Trump watches. Want to influence the president? Sure. Come to CNN or come to Fox. You can do that. Come to MSNBC. It'll cost you a little extra, but the authors, Daniel Lippman and Anna Palmer, write, the ad rates for Morning Joe, this is on MSNBC, have more than doubled post-election, according to one veteran media buyer. Trump, who reportedly watches the show most mornings, has a close relationship with Joe Scarborough. They talk regularly. Fox News is the O'Reilly factor. Other primetime programs on Fox News have boosted their rates by 50%, or about 50%. Trump is also a frequent viewer of that network's primetime shows. One media buyer said the president's media habits are so predictable, advertisers migrate to those areas. One prominent D.C. consultant said some of his clients including a big bank and major pharmaceutical company, were negotiating this week to buy ads on O'Reilly and Morning Joe because they knew they had a good chance of reaching the president. Trump has also been known to respond directly to what he's watching on television and tweet statistics and topics he sees on air. Those tweets often drives news coverage for the day. So he said, instead of lobbying through the usual channels, it's like speaking directly into the president's ear. One source at MSNBC acknowledged that ad rates for Morning Joe would likely go up. She said that with strategically placed ad buys in the New York and D.C. markets, it's likely the raise would increase and we would capitalize on increased interest. Right. Fox News declined to comment. This is pretty amazing stuff. And it's a sad commentary on the state of our media these days that, it's basically all about the money. Anyhow, enough of my rant. Clark in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Clark, what's on your mind today?
Yes. How are you, Tom?
Good.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I watch your show periodically a lot for the last year or so. What I wanted to address is that last Friday you were talking about the presidents who had made themselves look presidential by having wars, like Ronald Reagan went to Grenada, Mr. Johnson, LBJ, or Vietnam.
Bush Sr. in Iraq, Bush Jr. in Iraq, Afghanistan, yeah.
Yeah,
in fact, the only president who hasn't, and Bill Clinton in Bosnia, the only president who hasn't had a war during his presidency in my lifetime, I think, is Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter, yeah. Well, what I wanted to point out is there is one more country. Your statement was that we didn't have any more countries to invade, but there is one more. And I believe that Donald Trump will do it with his neocon military persons around him. And it will not be Iran. It will be North Korea. The next time Kim makes a outlandish statement or threatens South Korea, we're going to jump right in there. If you notice, Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, his first overseas trip was to Japan and South Korea. I believe that they're on the drawing board now at this time, making our ways to go in and how to come out.
Yeah, and North Korea is deep into the territory of China. I
know.
This is very problematic.
As you know, what I think it's going to be another. They're going to do another Malta. They're going to split up the world again.
Yeah,
it'll be.
Well, no, I don't disagree, Clark. And let us not forget, this falls in George W. Bush's lap. He said that the axis of evil was North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. And what happened? He took out Iraq, and North Korea and Iran said, "Holy cow, we've got to get some nukes." And they both started working on it. North Korea actually has the nukes now. Iran we successfully stopped Iran, although George W. Bush may be reversing that right now. Or excuse me, Donald Trump may be reversing that right now. But it was George Bush's rhetoric that started this. It was words, right? It was words that started this thing, which is why it's another reason why Donald Trump is so unnerving. Clark, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right now. Let me start out. The big question here, okay? The big question is, why is it that our poor neighborhoods remain poor? Whether it's in inner city Baltimore or whether it's in Appalachia, why is it that our poor neighborhoods remain poor? And I would argue that there is a cycle to this that has three major components. The first is that the schools suck in poor neighborhoods. There's no mystery or surprise to anybody. Schools tend not to do as well in poor neighborhoods. And part of that has been rationalized by people saying, well, That's because poor people are going to those schools, and their children start out life with, you know, a smaller vocabulary, and you know, those neighborhoods tend to be more polluted, and, you know, lead poisoning, God only knows. But anyhow, there's that argument, and I'm going to tell you why I think that those are all secondary arguments. The second is that policing tends to be different in poor communities and communities of color, and frankly worse. It's not as high quality as the policing in wealthy white neighborhoods, or even in you know, suburban upper middle class neighborhoods. And the third is that we you know, we're really starting to learn this clearly now, is that people of color literally have to stand in line twice as long as white people to vote every 2 years. Why is that? So here's the Trump riff that got me started thinking about this. Here he is. Here's Donald Trump.
I say it again. What do you have to lose? Look, what do you have to lose? You're living in poverty. Your schools are no good. You have no jobs. 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell do you have to lose?
So, you know, first of all, Trump, to a large extent, is just perpetuating white stereotypes of black communities, you know. And in fact, it's quite insulting. And the what do you have to lose is really easily answered by simply going through all the things that the Republicans are trying to undo. They've successfully, in fact, gutted the Voting Rights Act, you know, the Civil Rights Act. They want to go after, you know, frankly, everything all the way back to Brown v. Board. So there's a lot to lose. But setting that aside, because that argument has been well made both on this program and in other places, what I think is going on here is that this is a piece of the new Jim Crow, to paraphrase Michelle Alexander, that has to do, and I think the conservatives have been doing this really slick for a long time. And I think it all has to do with, it's the money, stupid. People stand in line in poor communities twice as long to vote as they do in rich communities. Why? Because voting systems are paid for at the county level. So there's a smaller budget to run good voting operations. You have fewer voting machines, or you have fewer ballot places, or you have fewer locations, you have fewer poll workers, so the lines get longer. So, you know, because they depend on the local property tax and the local income tax in those communities that have it. So that's voting. Schools are paid, you know, I went off on a rant about this yesterday. Schools are paid by property taxes. Therefore, poor neighborhoods have bad schools. Good neighborhoods have great schools. It's real simple. It's got nothing to do with charter schools or school choice or any of that kind of BS. This is just flack that's being thrown into the wind by, in some cases, well-meaning liberals. More often, I'd say conservatives who want to have private for-profit charter schools replace public education. But anyhow, the schools are funded locally. And then third, our police departments. Why do police departments, why do they have bad hiring standards? Why do they hire you know, in communities of color in particular, why do you tend to get police officers who are the bottom of the barrel, basically? They're not necessarily the best paid. They're certainly not the best trained. You know, why? Well, because they're funded locally. So where did this come from? These three things are the quality of the future of the neighborhood, which is the schools, the quality of life of the present of the neighborhood, which is the police, and the ability of the neighborhood to have a say in its own governance, which is voting. How is it that all three of these things suck in poor communities? And by the way, in poor white communities as well as black communities, although it seems to be worse in some African-American communities. Why is it that they suck? You know, even in the face of efforts to change things, I would say it's because they're all funded locally. And conservatives have been promoting this idea of local control. And I would suggest to you that local control is a euphemism for local funding. The last thing people in white wealthy suburbs want to do is have their property tax dollars or their income tax dollars go to pay for schools in poor black neighborhoods. They don't want to pay for the police in the poor black neighborhoods, and they don't want to pay for the voting stations in poor black neighborhoods or just poor neighborhoods. And so these neighborhoods then find themselves locked into this cycle of poverty because they don't have the resources to pull themselves out. They want... Thom Hartmann here with you. Mark White tweets, update phone lines are busy and voice messages full. Trying to call his Republican senators. He says, so tweet or Facebook your senator. Yeah, I would say do everything. Do everything you can. There's any communications vehicle that you can find, exploit it. Josh in American Fork, Utah. Hey, Josh, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Well, I followed your advice, and now I'm a legislative chair in Utah's Democratic Party, representing my district.
Good on you, Josh. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to talk to you about just a few weeks ago, my governor, Gary Herbert, pushed during his annual State of the State address that we need to reinvigorate principled federalism that will allow us to apply Utah solutions to Utah's challenges. Now we both know that Utah is perhaps the most Republican state in the union, and federalism is probably not working for us because we're failing in a lot of areas, education, particularly business, discrimination, and especially corruption. So to me, federalism isn't really effective for Utah, but it seems to be working well in California. But, I'm well aware of the history of states' rights and the banner it operates under, all the terrible histories therein. But do you think it would be worthwhile to give more powers to individual states? It seems to me that the nation is far too untenable to govern.
Yeah.
Especially now that we have a president and Congress that may undermine every accomplishment and dream that we've been pushing for.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one to watch, because if Trump succeeds or if the Republicans actually, I mean, they're more into this than Donald Trump is, succeed in killing off federal programs that are really useful and arguably necessary programs, support for education, support for healthcare, things like that. If they succeed in killing off at the federal level these programs and driving them down to the states, then what you're going to see is the maker states like California and New York, states that, California sends $7 to the federal government for every dollar they get back, whereas Utah probably, gets $1.50 back for every dollar that they send. I don't know what the numbers are specifically for Utah, but
I believe that's right, actually.
Yeah, virtually all the red states are getting, and some of them are getting $2 and $3 back for every dollar they send. And it's several $1 trillion. There's about a $3.5 trillion difference between red states and blue states. The red states take money from the federal government. The blue states make money, give money to the federal government. So if the federal government were to get out of the business of equalizing all this stuff and just say to the red states, good luck, you're on your own, say to the blue states, good luck, you're on your own, the blue states would be just fine. They're the ones that are actually showing a profit. They're the ones who are subsidizing the red states. And if the red states lose those subsidies, they're going to be in deeper and deeper trouble. And you're going to see like Sam Brownback is destroying Kansas, like Bobby Jindal did to Louisiana. I mean, to the point where even down in the deep South, they elected a Democrat, John Bel Edwards, as governor, because Bobby Jindal had screwed it up so badly trying to be conservative enough to run for president. So if they pull this off, it has the potential of genuinely creating a two America, and that could lead to some really substantial internal strife, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. It's because there's a lot of people who can't just like get up and move to California, and it's more expensive to live in the blue states also. So, Josh, it's going to be one to keep an eye on. Thanks for the call. It's a very important topic. Lisa in Seattle. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hey, Lisa.
Second time calling.
Thank you.
Hey, I was telling the screener that I lived in Seattle, where I'm a nurse. I worked at the hospitals there for many, many years, and I decided to become an organic grower and bought some property out in the rural areas and started working at a rural hospital. And my patient population changed from being quite liberal to big Trump supporters. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, sorry. And I've heard some statements and rhetoric that are kind of frightening to me, and I'm worried about social breakdown, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard some of my patients make comments like, "Ha, stupid liberals, go ahead and keep pushing it. We're the ones who have all the guns."
Uh-huh.
That's very worrisome to me.
Well, it's a slogan. I mean, there's a lot of liberals with guns too, but I get it. I think it's really rage against the machine. Don't you think that's coming out of a sense of impotence?
Probably, but I also deal with a lot of mental illness. And when I look at this, is the first time I've had a president that I've looked at and said, massive protests and making this guy angry could be a little bit dangerous. Other protests, I could trust that the president would call out the National Guard if things went south. I'm not sure this one would. And I'm just kind of putting that out there as a topic to discuss.
Yeah. Are we on the verge of a social breakdown?
Well, there is a university in New Mexico University. He studied this. He's actually a mathematician, but he applies it to empires. And he says we are on course within 4 years to have social breakdown in this country if we don't make a big change.
Wow. What's his name?
Darn it, I meant to look that up. He is a professor at the University of New Mexico, and he's basically a mathematician who studied empires and their fall.
Interesting. If you track it down, give us a call back. You can just tell Nate, or or we can put you on the air with it. Okay, Lisa, thank you for the call. It's a really, really good question. I don't have an easy answer or a glib answer, although I think that what Donald Trump is doing right now is encouraging social breakdown. He's pitting Americans against each other. It's a divide and conquer strategy against his own country or within his own country, and that typically, and Richard Nixon did the same thing, or not on anything close to the level that Trump is doing it. But, this was the essence of Nixon's Southern strategy. And it was very destructive. It continues. We are still suffering the pain of, Nixon's Southern strategy, although it brought Republicans to power repeatedly. Reagan repeated it and so on. Lisa, thanks for the call. Sabrina in Nottingham, Pennsylvania. Hey, Sabrina, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk about the upcoming DNC chair vote.
Mm-hmm.
So the membership is going to be voting the week of, I believe, the 23rd, 24th, something like that.
Oh, February, yeah.
Yeah, February. And so I would like to encourage everybody, if they're up for it, to contact them on Democrats.org and try to push at the chair left, more progressive, somebody like Jamie Harrison, Keith Ellison, or Ray Buckley.
Mm-hmm.
And all they have to do is go online, and there's a place where they can click on and give their comments before the vote.
Oh, that's great. Democrats.org is running that?
Well, if you go to their website, there's 2 different places that you can make comments, and it's very easy to find either one.
Okay, great. Sabrina?
I just want to get that out there before that time, and hopefully people can, do that, and we can get something going here and get more progressive.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sabrina, thank you for the call. Mary in Chicago. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Okay, I want to emphasize the importance of participation in the political process.
Mm-hmm.
2 years before Donald Trump got elected, we elected a Republican governor in the lowest voter turnout in the state's history. Since that time, people have been up in arms in the way he has been dealing with the legislature.
Right. This is Illinois' Bruce Rauner that you're talking about.
He has taken my way or the highway. He is hell bent in breaking unions in this state, but particularly public employee unions.
Yep.
The only thing that is stopping him is the Democratic legislature right now.
Right. And I guarantee you the Koch brothers and their network and their friends are pouring tons, and probably Betsy DeVos, pouring tons of money into those legislative races, whether it's for the U.S. House, for the Senate, or for the
for the legislature, for the Illinois legislature. And Bruce Rauner is a billionaire, isn't he? Your governor?
Yes, he is. He's a venture capitalist who, who had a string of nursing homes, horrible conditions that people were, are living in these nursing homes.
Oh, so he got rich ripping people off on health care, just like Rick Scott. That's amazing. That's amazing. Mary, thank you for the information. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
That would be Republican Governor Rick Scott of Florida, whose company committed the largest Medicare fraud and was convicted of it in history. And welcome back. Henry, watching Free Speech TV in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Hey, Henry, what's on your mind today?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. That's not Las Vegas, Nevada, that's New Mexico? There's two of them?
That's correct.
Okay, what's up, Henry?
About the Reichstag building in Berlin. I heard the following story from a German. He said that shortly after the burning, a father sits at the dinner table with his younger children, and one of the kids asked his father, "Daddy, who burned the Reichstag building?" Now, you know the German word for eating is essen. So the answer of the father to his son, he says, "SS, mein Sohn."
Oh, jeez.
Which has a double meaning here.
Terrible pun, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I got it.
And it points to a fact that not all the Germans were fooled.
Yeah. No, they weren't. I've been reading Fritz Tyson's book, I Funded Hitler, and I'm maybe 10% into it. I've been hopping around in it and marking places that I want to read on the air, and I'm going to do that as we go through the next couple of weeks. But it's an amazing story. This guy was like a major industrialist, arguably, if not one of the 5 richest guys in Germany. His father had started a major company. He talks about it and how the company got started and how, and they saw Hitler as a guy that, was going to restore the glory of Germany, as a guy who was going to, rebuild German industry, who was going to bring the jobs back home, right? And so, he threw in behind Hitler, and he was good friends with Goebbels. I mean, throughout the book, he keeps referring to, I was offended by this, so I called Goebbels, and he said, "Oh, don't worry." Goebbels said, "That's just Hitler being Hitler." And, this was during the first couple of years. And then, he started getting alarmed. And eventually, Hitler was, on a rampage to take him out, too. So it's an amazing book. I had paid $90 for a copy of it. It's been out of print for a long, long time. But one of our viewers or listeners called in and said, "You got to read this book." And so I tracked it down, and it really and truly is mind-boggling.
Yeah, fascinating history. Yeah.
It is. Henry, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for the German joke, as it were. Darren in Long Beach, California. Darren, we got a minute to the break. What's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
First of all, I want to say thank you for being a friend of the people.
You're welcome.
Second of all, in my opinion, Bible prophecy is coming true. In Ezekiel, it states that in the last days that people will be throwing money in the streets because it won't be worth anything. And then in Revelation chapter 11, verse 18, it states that I will ruin those who are ruining the earth.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was I shall destroy those who destroy you.
Did they proclaim California a
sanctuary state?
Yes.
To the best of my knowledge, Jerry Brown has not done that. I don't know what the status of that is right now. It would create a huge.
And Trump says that he's going to withhold the money that they give him, but can California withhold the money that they actually pay to the federal government?
I'm not sure that either one has the legal authority to do that. But I'm not an attorney and I'm not an expert on that stuff, so my opinion should be taken with a grain of salt, Darren. But that's my guess, is that it would require some substantial changes in law for essentially secession. on the part of California, and that's not something that goes down well. We fought a civil war over that. Darren, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. And on the line with us, Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So your newsletter this morning was chock full of interesting stuff. What's happening in the world today?
Well, we have Minnesota and Washington State are telling the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that restoring President Trump's ban on refugees and travelers from 7 predominantly Muslim countries would unleash chaos again. They have filed their briefs, which they had to do by 3 o'clock this morning. They've now been joined by a declaration filed by former Secretaries of State John Kerry and Madeleine Albright and 8 other former U.S. officials of the national security type under President Obama. Very, very strong language in this declaration, including saying that that the ban would disrupt lives and cripple counterterrorism partnerships, saying it will aid ISIL's propaganda efforts and serve its recruitment message by feeding into the narrative that the U.S. is at war with Islam, also saying that blanket bans are beneath the dignity of the nation and Constitution that we each took oaths to protect.
Well said.
And the tech industry has also weighed in. So the next opportunity is that the Justice Department has to file its briefs by 6 o'clock tonight.
That's Pacific time, isn't it?
Sorry?
Is that Pacific time or Eastern
time? Eastern time.
Eastern time.
Meantime, White House spokesman Sean Spicer has weighed in and has said that the judge, Robart in the case, said that that President Trump utilized his power in a very legal, constitutional manner to ensure that we are safe, our people are safe, our country is safe, our institutions are safe, and it's somewhat sad to see a judge go rogue like this.
Wow.
Jumping to the other side of the pond, House of Commons Speaker John Bercow has said he would be strongly opposed to President Trump addressing the Houses of Parliament during his state visit to the UK.
You mean so-called President Trump?
That's your language.
Hey, you know, he's asserting that people in government are so-called judges. And he didn't really win the popular vote. So anyhow, back to you, Victoria. I'm sorry.
Anyway, so Bercow told MPs opposition to racism and sexism were hugely important considerations. He was applauded by Scottish National Party MPs. Now, Trump was invited to make a state visit after meeting Prime Minister Theresa May in Washington last month, and a petition to withdraw the invitation is going to be debated by MPs on the 20th of this month after it attracted 1.8 million signatures. Now, Bercow said some quite extraordinary things, that before the imposition of the migrant ban, he said he would have been strongly opposed, and after the imposition, I'm even more strongly opposed to an address by President Trump. And he said that he's one of 3 key holders for Westminster Hall, so he said so. This is pretty strong stuff for a speaker to weigh in like this.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
Republican Governor Eric Greitens of Missouri is signing a bill today to make Missouri the 28th right-to-work state, delivering a big win for primarily Republican supporters who've worked for years to pass the measure banning mandatory union fees and dues.
Right. Let's destroy the unions. It's the first thing Republicans do when they get power. So.
Yeah, 7 of 8 states that surround Missouri already have right-to-work laws. Now, it may not be the end of the battle. Missouri's AFL-CIO president, Mike Lewis, has submitted several versions of a proposed initiative petition to the Secretary of State's office that would reverse a right-to-work law. And if enough signatures are collected, voters could decide in 2018 whether to adopt a constitutional amendment protecting workplace contracts requiring all employees to pay fees covering the cost of union representation.
Wow. That'll be interesting because that's going to bring a pile of Koch money. You know, it's like the unions have been their bugaboo forever.
So it's going to be that'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
House Democrats had a press conference this morning blasting President Trump's executive orders curtailing financial regulation, saying that the White House wants to bring the country back to the days leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader, saying they want to take us right back to that place.
Yeah. And they're pretty unapologetic about it.
Very unapologetic about it. Yes, indeed. Saying that instead of fighting for hardworking families abused by our economy, as he promised in the campaign, the president and his billionaire cabinet have abandoned Main Street to enable Wall Street's corrosive profiteering of the banks on the back of hardworking Americans.
Yeah. I wonder if I should call him a so-called billionaire, too. Well, anyhow, back to you, Victoria.
Well, there have been a number of very interesting articles about that.
Yes. Well, you know, Wall Street is selling $1.5 billion worth of Trump debt that's been tranched and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's why he couldn't dispose of his companies, because they're underwater. And so if you're going to dispose of an underwater company, that's called bankruptcy. I don't think he...
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Pelosi also said that Trump's first weeks in office have been deeply troubling, but offer no grounds for impeachment.
Okay.
And she was responding to recent comments from Representative Maxine Waters, who had said last week that her greatest desire is to lead Trump right into impeachment.
Well, I think one of the things that we learned from the Republicans in the late 80s, the late 90s, was that you don't need a grounds for impeachment. You just keep digging and digging and digging until you find some small thing and blow that all out of proportion. And, you know, Bill Clinton having an affair in this case, it was the, 34th or 37th investigation that they'd had of Clinton. I mean, they started, you know, with Whitewater and went through everything, you know, the travel gate and Rose Law and all. It's just, you just keep it on until you find it. And I doubt that the Democrats will do that, but, you know, apparently the bar is fairly low now.
But they don't have control of the House.
That's right. So there will be no investigations.
Exactly.
At least until after 2018.
And that's what they're hoping to do, to strategize about at their Democratic House retreat this week.
Good.
Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, today said that Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch, is of the far extreme right, saying he doesn't believe that the LGBT community should be able to use the courts to seek redress for discrimination. But he said that Democrats will hold a committee hearing and a vote. He says that's the process that should have happened with Merrick Garland, but it didn't happen.
They're not going to wait the roughly 300 days that Merrick Garland had to wait?
Doesn't look like it. And Gorsuch is on his rounds of the Senate this week. He's visiting a lot of senators this week.
Interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if, you know, who the Democrats are who pop up for him. And it's also, you know, Trump is, now they're talking, the White House is talking about using his Twitter account to go after Democrats who vote against Gorsuch, which is going to be problematic.
It'll be interesting to see if they're bothered by that or not.
Yeah, or if they're helped by it, who knows? But it's, you know, I think in a number of states, we underestimate Trump's popularity at our own peril. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
Great to speak. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hi, for the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from The Crash of 2016, which might happen in early 2017. We'll see, but it's coming. This is from Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is titled Reagan Kidnapped the Jetsons. In a 1966 article, Time magazine looked toward the future and what the rise of automation would mean for average working Americans. It concluded, quote, by 2000, the machines will be producing so much that everyone in the U.S. will, in effect, be independently wealthy. With government benefits, even non-working families will have, by one estimate, an annual income of $30,000 to $40,000. How to use leisure meaningfully will be a major problem. End of quote. And that was $30,000 to $40,000 in 1966 dollars, which would roughly be $199,000 to $260,000 in 2010 dollars. Ask anybody who was a teenager or older in the 1960s. This was a big sales pitch for automation and the coming computer age. There was even a cartoon show about it, The Jetsons. And everybody looked forward to the day when increased productivity from robots, computers, and automation would translate into fewer hours worked or more pay or both for every American worker. And there was good logic behind the idea. The premise was simple. With better technology, companies would become more efficient. They'd be able to make more things in less time. Revenues would skyrocket, and Americans would bring home higher and higher paychecks, all the while working fewer and fewer hours. So by the year 2000, according to Time magazine in 1966, we would enter what was then referred to as the leisure society. Futurists speculated that the biggest problem facing America in that Jetsons future of the year 2000 would be just how the heck everyone would use all their extra leisure time. And of course, there were also those who worried about what kind of degeneracy would emerge when a nation has lots of money and free time on its hands. Neither happened, and it didn't happen because Ronald Reagan stole the leisure society from us and handed it over to the economic royalists. In 1981, the royalists went right to work, taking down that first pillar on which FDR rebuilt the American middle class, progressive taxation. Taking advantage of the oil shock crisis, neoliberal shock troopers immediately ushered through a revolutionary change in the tax code with the Economic Recovery Act of 1981. The first major piece of legislation signed by Reagan is slashed the top marginal income tax rate from 70% to 50%, cutting estate taxes for wealthy businesses and slashing capital gains and corporate profit taxes. Reagan succeeded a few years later in dropping the top income tax rate even more to 28%, where it hadn't been since the Great Depression. It was the second largest tax cut in history, and it was nearly identical to the largest tax cut ever, Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon's in the 1920s, the one that created the bubble known as the Roaring Twenties, which eventually burst in 1929. The great forgetting had certainly arrived. The economic mistakes of the 1920s were coming back around. And again, the influx of all this hot money in the market, coupled with a robust deregulation agenda throughout the 1980s and 90s, would trigger a series of painful financial panics. The reason why the leisure society could be imagined by Time magazine is because ever since 1900, working people's wages tracked evenly with working people's productivity. So as productivity can continue to rise, which was likely due to increased automation and better technology, so too would everyone's wages. And the glue holding this logic together was the current top marginal income tax rate. In 1966, when the Time article was written, the top marginal income tax rate was 70%. And what that effectively did was encourage CEOs to keep more money in their businesses and invest in new technology to pay their workers more, to hire new workers and expand. After all, what's the point of sucking millions and millions of dollars out of your business if it's going to be taxed at 70%? According to this line of reasoning, if businesses were to suddenly become more profitable and efficient thanks to automation, then that money would flow throughout the businesses, raising everyone's standard of living, increasing everyone's leisure time. But when Reagan dropped that top tax rate down to 28%, everything changed, as you can see in this graph. Now, as businesses became more profitable, there was a far greater incentive for CEOs to pull those profits out of the company and pocket them because they were suddenly paying an incredibly low tax rate. And that's exactly what they did. All those new profits, thanks to automation, that were supposed to go to everyone, giving us all higher paychecks and more time off, instead went to the top, to the economic royalists. Suddenly, the symmetry in the productivity wages chart broke down. Productivity continued increasing because technology continued improving, but wages stayed flat. And again, since higher and higher profits could be sucked out of the company and taxed at lower and lower levels, there was no incentive to reduce the number of hours everyone worked. In the 1950s, before that Time magazine article predicted the leisure society, before that article was written, the average American working in manufacturing put in about 42 hours of work a week. Today, the average American working in manufacturing puts in about 40 hours a week. This means that despite the fact that productivity has increased 400% since 1950, Americans are working on average only 2 fewer hours a week. If productivity is 4 times higher than in 1950, then Americans should be able to work 4 times less, or just 10 hours a week, to afford the same 1950s lifestyle when a family of 4 could get by on just 1 paycheck, own a home, own a car, put their kids through school, take a vacation every now and then, and retire comfortably. But all that was wiped out by Reaganomics and Ronald Reagan. And that's just the beginning of the setup for the crash of 2016.
It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm very pleased to have on the line with us Professor William Black. He's a professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, the author of The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. Professor Black is a former bank regulator who led investigations of the savings and loan crisis in the 80s. He blogs or writes for neweconomicperspectives.org, and you can tweet him at William K. Black. Professor Black, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
It's been way too long since we have talked. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Trump administration working with the Wall Street banksters to roll back regulations on Wall Street, and how this doesn't seem to be eliciting a peep of resistance from the Republican base.
Well, you don't expect it necessarily from the Republican base, because after all, they were supposedly the great haters of regulation. But all those new voters, all those populist types, they were promised that Trump would be taking on the bankers. In the first Republican debate, Trump said, "You don't know bankers like I do. They're killers." Right?
That's right.
And he, in one of his late ads in the campaign, he used the photo of Blankfein, the head of Goldman Sachs, to embody all that was evil, and how the Democrats had failed to take on Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid, and such.
But Goldman Sachs stock is up 1/3 since the election.
Well, the stocks in general, of course, are up enormously because business loves the idea of being able to loot with impunity. It's not like the Obama administration put any of them in jail, but it did at least have some fines against the corporations. And now that there's a prospect of evisceration of the rules, putting Goldman Sachs people all over the top positions of the administration to ensure that whatever rules still exist won't be enforced, and putting an anti-prosecutor in again as the attorney general. They're going to create the most criminogenic environment in the history of the United States, both for elite fraud by these corporate types, but also good old-fashioned corruption.
Well, we've seen this happen a couple of times. I mean, Warren Harding in 1920 ran on a campaign platform of less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize. And he also campaigned on tax cuts. He dropped the 91% tax rate that was in effect in 1920 down to 25% over the course of the first 4 years, by 1925. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. I don't think I am. And, that led directly to the great crash of 1929. Ronald Reagan deregulated the S&Ls in the early 80s. I think it was 82, 83. That led to the crash of the S&Ls in 86, which you were involved in unwinding or checking out. Then the Republicans, along with Bill Clinton, I don't know how much he was a cheerleader or if he just signed the legislation not even realizing what was going on. Between the Commodity Futures Modernization Act and the bill that killed Glass-Steagall, deregulated the banks in 99 and 2000. That led right to 2008. Should we expect that this is going to be a repeat of these cycles?
Oh, don't forget the Enron fraud.
Oh, yeah. That was the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, actually. Phil Graham, his wife Wendy, was on the board of Enron, and that was his baby.
So, well, actually, the time sequence is slightly different. First, they passed the Commodities Future Modernization Act. That created the general black hole in our ability to regulate financial derivatives. And if in answer to your question, Bill Clinton was an enthusiastic supporter of that, not a reluctant one. But yes, you're right. It was assuredly bipartisan. This is the 13 bankers that show up in the Treasury Secretary's office to demand the scalp of Brooksley Born, the only sort of real regulator in the entire.
I remember that now. You're right.
Right. And then after that, with Brooksley Born out and the Republicans back in charge, they appoint Wendy Graham to chair the Commodities Future Trading Commission. And Wendy then does a special energy derivative carve out of derivatives that weren't covered by the Commodities Future Modernization Act. And using those two carve outs that create this immense regulatory black hole, Enron engineers artificial shortages of electricity that bankrupt California, cause the Democratic governor to be annihilated, and make Enron a fortune. The good old days.
Right. And Ken Lay had a secret meeting with Arnold Schwarzenegger early on in this process. And when Darrell Issa found out about it, he broke down in tears because he wanted to be the next governor of California.
So, yeah, it's even worse because on the way to that California meeting, Ken Lay met with Dick Cheney.
Right.
And the California senators were begging and pushing the administration to use its authority under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to block these immense price rises. And Lay, we know subsequently, though this was all kept secret at the time, gave his wish list to Dick Cheney of the infamous secret energy committee, in which, much like Tillerson, they brought all the bad guys within the tent and kept it secret how they would carve up American energy and land and things like that. And the next day, Dick Cheney went out and delivered this full-scale, right from the script attack, and said, that there would be no price caps, warning off the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and adding gratuitously a blast at California as a bunch of tree huggers that had caused their own problem because they didn't, build more turbines. In fact, demand was unusually low for electricity. But what was happening is the energy companies were deliberately taking production offline.
Right. Creating artificial scarcities.
Creating brownouts and blackouts and threatening people's lives.
Right, and wiping out Gray Davis as governor. So you've been observing this for some time. Where do you think the current deregulatory environment that the Trump administration is promoting is going to take us? What is your prognosis?
Well, it is so bad that there are parts of the Wall Street Journal that are actually aghast. So there's an article as we speak that talks about Trump is going to kick off a renewal of the disastrous race to the bottom. And so this is where mostly it's a contest between the U.S. with Wall Street and the United Kingdom with the City of London on who can have the weakest regulation, the weakest supervision, and the least danger of anyone being prosecuted, what we call the 3 Ds: deregulation, desupervision, and de facto decriminalization. And this was a race that, again, both parties ran. In the United Kingdom, Blair deliberately modeled himself after Clinton. So he called it New Labor instead of New Democrats. And he excoriated his regulators, financial regulators, as supposedly being mean to the bankers. Now, banking supervision had died completely under him and such. Now with Brexit as a threat, where the United Kingdom fears losing parts of the City of London finance to Frankfurt and other places, Singapore, Hong Kong and such, the Brits, especially under the very conservative Prime Minister May, will have every incentive to be even more aggressive than the United States in this deregulation, except now it looks also like they're trying to kick off a race to the bottom on corporate income tax. And again, with Brexit and the loss of the ability to be part of the EU in terms of tariffs, the United Kingdom is also going to have a huge incentive to reduce corporate income taxes and try to outcompete the Irish that are so close to their shores.
So all this happens, and where does it lead us? Is this the setup for economic prosperity, which is the sales pitch we're getting from Theresa May and so-called President Donald Trump, or is this the setup for another crash? Are we looking at repeating the mistakes of Harding and Coolidge?
The answer, of course, is yes. And that is because the first thing you have to produce to get the really big crisis is the next really big bubble. And everything looks good in a bubble, as Bill Clinton knows, right? Bill Clinton took credit for all those years, his brilliance, his embrace of austerity, and it was all wonderful. Well, he was the beneficiary, of course, of the 2 biggest bubbles in world history, the tech bubble and the housing bubble, which didn't just start under the Bush. It was going big time in the later years of the Clinton administration as well. So we're going to probably have the Trump bubble.
So what's the bubble?
The May bubble in the UK.
Yeah, I have heard that the banksters are now tranching car loans and student loans, particularly student loans, because they're non-defaultable. And that they're basically doing the same thing they did with mortgages. Are they doing mortgages again? I mean, what bubble do we expect to pop?
We don't know yet, but it has to be big enough that it actually causes major financial institutions to get into liquidity crises. So you are correct. They are doing exotic derivatives of things like student loans and subprime. In fact, they call it subprime automobile loans. Right. But you also have to remember the crisis that we know best, the one that blew up the world in 2008, that was the 3rd iteration of these kinds of derivatives. these kinds of derivatives, which are called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, they were first done by Michael Milken with junk bonds. Then they were, and those, of course,
and that was during the Reagan years, wasn't it?
That was during Reagan and Bush years. That is correct. The first Bush. Then they did it again under the late years of Clinton and right into early Bush when it crashed again. And what they did then was a whole menagerie, but a lot of manufactured housing. So that's mobile home trailer type stuff that doesn't have a very good resale value. So that crashed. And then the third one was the new and improved, hey, liar's loans. Let's package a bunch of liar's loans, which we know to have a 90% fraud incidence, and then we'll pay outrageous fees to the credit rating agencies who will give us a AAA.
Right.
And while alchemists can never transmute lead to gold, credit rating agencies, baby, they can take toxic.
And this is what they're doing with subprime car loans.
And this is what they're doing. But they're much smaller in dollar amounts than the crisis. So you need, to get the really big crisis again, you need a much bigger bubble. But we're only in the first month of the term.
Right.
Give it time, baby.
Right. Fascinating. So you're predicting a bubble coming out of this and a crash coming out of the bubble, essentially.
Yeah. But the first thing, again, is remember, in a bubble, every stupid decision in the world looks brilliant.
Yeah, there you go. Professor William Black. You're absolutely brilliant, sir. Professor William Black, professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, the author of the book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. Professor Black, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. You can read his stuff at neweconomicperspectives.org. You can tweet him at William K. Black.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of my thoughts on the news of the day and your calls. And welcome back. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Thanks very much, Tom. You brought up a point earlier in the show about a monetization and an increase of value in ads because people knew what shows Trump was watching. And I wanted to offer the idea that that business model was something being practiced already, reaching out to Congress. There were technology companies, aerospace companies, space companies running ads like, I guess it'd be IBM or Boeing or Lockheed Martin, and they knew that they were going to be on in the offices of representatives and senators. And the thing that tipped me off to it, I guess it was back like 2013, there was this weird acronym in the middle of this line of things that this particular aerospace company did, and it looked like the word Kaiser phonetically, but because my TV was such lousy resolution, I couldn't really read it. And then I got help looking it up, and it turned out to be the acronym C4ISR, and it stood for four words starting with C: Command, Control, Computers, Communication, and then ISR was Intelligence, Surveillance, and I can't remember the word for R.
Research or something? Anyway, whatever. Renaissance.
Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance.
And that really didn't have a whole lot to do with the price of an airplane ticket from New York to Los Angeles. And so it became this itch that I had to scratch, and it turns out that these guys were marketing to Congress directly.
Right. Oh, living in Washington, D.C., when Congress is in session, you can tell when Congress is in session, when everybody's here in D.C. as opposed to back home in their districts, you get all these highly political ads that are clearly targeted at members of Congress on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. And oddly, they kind of vanish from the screens. And I'm talking about everything from, like, I mean, this is how they got the MEK, M-E-K, the anti-Iran terrorist group that kills Iranians. They were listed as a terrorist organization. They got them delisted by running ads here in Washington, D.C. It was amazing. I was watching these ads going, what the hell is this? And I had to look it up. And it was just, it was a sales pitch to members of Congress. It had nothing to do with you or me. We had nothing to do with delisting MEK, but Congress did it. The Republicans in Congress, yes, sir, we'll do it.
William Black had a great interface with Eleanor Goldfield on her show Act Out.
Uh-huh.
And if people wanted to see more about what he was talking about today, they would probably be able to find that segment at Act Out.
Okay.
He was talking about how well, I say net neutrality is every bit the thing or the parallel of what Enron did with their monetizing of electricity access.
Oh, sure. Once net neutrality is destroyed, and Trump is going to destroy it, expect to see the websites that are not nice to corporate America, particularly big ISPs, slow down really, really fast, really much. Thank you, Rich.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Beats.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dave in Irvine, California. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Oh, I just wanted to ask you, you just had that guy on there talking about the crash and everything and going to the bottom. And what I wanted to know is, do you think that people with 401s again will lose everything like they did before? And how can you stop it? Why don't they, if it's gonna crash again, why don't they bring back Glass? I think it's called Glass-Steagall or something.
Yeah, Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was the law that separated checkbook banks from the old Merrill Lynch, the brokerage houses, the banks, the investment banks. And it does need to be brought back. And in fact, if you want to do away with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, just bring back Glass-Steagall and it becomes unnecessary. You want to do away with Dodd-Frank, just bring back Glass-Steagall and it becomes unnecessary. It's really that straightforward. But everybody has been afraid to do it, and it needs to be done. But the Republicans, of course, are not going to do this. Dave, thanks for the call. I think we're in a bubble right now, but we'll see. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after. The other path is the study that American psychologist Bruce Alexander did, a study that he did at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, in Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, BC. This was in the 1970s. And I've talked about this in the past on this program, the study where, this is your brain on drugs, right? Remember the Reagan drug war, Reagan amping up Nixon's drug war? And they had this study where these rats in these cages, if they were given water or water with cocaine or water with heroin, they would choose the drugged water and they would keep taking it and taking it and taking it until they died. And that was like, therefore, we've got to go out and really clamp down on these drug dealers and let's build Homan Square in Chicago or whatever, right? And he looked at this and he says, those rats are in solitary confinement. Of course they're going to medicate themselves. In fact, there's I have a quote from him relative to that. He says, they were severely distressed animals, and severely distressed animals, like severely distressed people, will relieve their distress pharmacologically if they can. So he built a 200-square-foot housing colony, 200 times the square footage of a standard laboratory rat cage. This is from the Psychology Wiki, by the way. Psychology.wikia.com/Ricky/Rat Park Studies. Interestingly, this study has been replicated. Bothman, Murray, and Wise in 1989 published it in Pharmacology, Biochemistry, and Behavior. Although the Wikipedia page on the Rat Park says it's never been successfully replicated, and it's nonsense. It's not nonsense, and it has been replicated. And, just like, don't believe everything you read on the internet, I guess. But anyhow, he built this 200-square-foot, 16 to 20 rats of both sexes in residence, an abundance of food, balls, wheels for play, private places for mating and giving birth. Rats who had been forced to consume morphine for 57 days on end. In other words, what you would think of as a seriously addicted drug, were brought to Rat Park and given a choice between plain tap water and water laced with morphine. For the most part, they chose the plain water. Nothing we tried, Alexander wrote, produced anything that looked like addiction in rats that were housed in a reasonably normal environment. So, crime in Chicago, or crime anywhere, is it a symptom of people? I mean, we're mammals, rats are mammals. We have very similar nervous systems, and we share a limbic brain. If people feel that the quality of their life is not that different from how the rats feel when they're in a lab cage, they're gonna act out in ways that are dysfunctional, just like the rats did. We also know from rat crowding experiments that were done back in the 60s and 70s that if you crowd rats, they'll turn on each other, they'll kill each other. So, is the solution to the problem of crime in the United States, and I'm using Chicago as an example just because Donald Trump keeps, and every Republican at every turn, in every opportunity, will point to it and mention it. And, as I've said many times, I think, part of the problem with gun violence in Chicago is the fact that Mike Pence's Indiana has super lax gun laws, and people can just, drive over the border and pick up, most of the guns that are found in Chicago came from Indiana. But is the solution to do what Donald Trump is suggesting, which is what President Duarte is doing in the Philippines right now, which is basically declare all-out war on people who are behaving badly? Duarte is killing them. I haven't heard Trump call for that, but it's happening anyway. Or is the solution to go in and say, okay, here's a neighborhood in distress. We're going to undistress this neighborhood. We're going to put in some really high-quality schools. We're going to bring jobs into this neighborhood. It's time for a Works Progress Administration, a WPA. The government is going to be the employer of last resort. If no company, see, this is assuming that we don't change our trade laws so that the jobs come back to America. So let's make the government the employer of last resort. There's lots of things that need to be done. There's things that could be manufactured. There's things that, there's just lots of things that could be done. We could create government jobs, government paid for jobs. As Franklin Roosevelt said, the best welfare program is a job. People, gives people meaning in their lives. Go into these neighborhoods and say, okay, here are the here's jobs, here's housing, here's food, here's good education. Let's standardize all this stuff. Let's improve all this stuff. Let's create a reasonable, instead of we're just going to drop people in the middle of the poverty level, let's bring people up to at least the bottom of what you would call the middle class, and then let them launch themselves from there, because they will. We've seen this over and over and over again in the history of the United States, and the best example was the WPA and the CCC. So, my rule.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I think we need to seriously change the way that we're looking at crime in this country. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And is it Sandra in Seattle, Washington?
Yes, it is. Hi, Tom. I'm Sandra.
Hey, Sandra. What's up?
First-time caller. Listened for a couple of years. I wondered about our popular media and authoritarianism. You've been looking at Hitler, and I would like to recommend a book published in 2010 by he's a ceramicist, but he looked at his family's history, wealthy Jewish family, and it's called The Hair with Amber Eyes. He
H-E-I-R?
No, it's H-A-R-E.
Oh,
as
in rabbit.
They're amber-like tiny figures made in Japan.
Uh-huh.
But the wealthy people in Europe, particularly this Jewish family, collected them. But it was about their journey through family, and along with that, the family's experience of losing their fortune in Austria during the war. But there were scenes of cafes that they frequented, and how anti-Semitism affected them, and the authoritarianism of Franz Joseph, and how it reassured people, but the shock and awe of Hitler's invasion, and basically how they flourished or didn't flourish, and how they survived or didn't survive. But we've been talking about the popular media, and they do disseminate a type of, I think we've had a light authoritarianism, light in our own government for a long time, where we don't hear the type of news that Democracy Now!, who I'm starting to listen to, but and the popular media does disseminate that. And I hope this isn't a foolish idea, but I wondered about a popular boycott of corporate media, and if it would be possible to take place in our country and deprive them of money.
Sandra, boycotts, particularly of media, are getting harder and harder, in as much as you've got basically a monopolistic media structure in the United States, outside of the internet anyway, and even on the internet you see any websites that do really well getting snapped up, like the Huffington Post being bought by Time Warner, for example. And so I'm skeptical of that, but it's on the other hand, there's a lot of people who are just saying, the corporate media, they're just chasing shiny things, and I really want some better news, and so they're tuning to Sirius XM, or they're going to Free Speech TV or whatever, and finding real news, which I think is a good thing. Sandra, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Bill in Santa Maria, California. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Tom, this is Bill and Soon calling you. And,
hey, Bill.
Sending you a big greeting.
Thank you. Back at you.
And Louise, too. This Hitler thing with Trump. Now, I think I've got a couple of comments, but I think it's really good that the hackles are coming up so quickly all over America on this Hitler analogy. But, like Lloyd Benson said, I know Hitler. Hitler was a friend of mine, and Trump is no Hitler. he's not smart enough. He's a bumbling showman.
Well, largely that was apparently true of Hitler too, but he had Goebbels, and Trump has got Bannon.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So we really need to be, a country never got harmed by being too aware and alert about Hitler things coming up in their democracy. So good for you, and keep pushing that. There's a new play about by Robert Sheehan about Trump, and it's going to start playing all over the United States, and it draws that analogy. Also.
Oh, that should be interesting. Bill, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for the kind words, and give my best to soon. Great to hear from you, Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, what's up?
Hey, Mike. Tom, it's interesting that you're talking about the topic of the Dodd-Frank and the regulations, because I wanted to dig into this to learn more, because it's so complex and complicated how all this came down. And I found myself on a couple of movies on Netflix, and one of it is called The Big Short, which is based on the real characters that were behind shorting against and betting against the subprime mortgages.
Right.
And there was Steve Carell and other people.
Yeah, Adam McKay made the movie.
Yeah, and it's based on a true novel. It's a fascinating movie. It breaks it down. I did have to stop it a few times and reference some things, but it really gave me a true perspective of how corrupt what was going on. It literally was just a domino effect. Everything we heard, a house of cards. But I would urge, the people who want to understand the derivatives and these other products and markets that were put together, kind of because there's no regulations against it, and how it all happened. And the gentleman who brought up, will people lose their 401ks? Yeah, if they're allowed to, the banks and all these guys are allowed to bet against mortgages, and they're based on nothing. And they talked about the last point I'm going to make is that what I didn't realize is when they short and then they keep, it's kind of like standing in line where, one guy bets against somebody who's going to win or not win. Right. And then the next person bets against if they're going to win or not win. So there could be, 2,000 people betting against whether a mortgage or an interest rate, interest on a house is going to make it or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I saw the movie, and Adam McKay did an absolutely brilliant job. In that movie.
Yeah, and the other movie on Netflix is called The Inside Job, which kind of is about the same story. It's more of a documentary type, but I'll leave you alone. But it's fascinating. And the other thing is, too, if they bring back deregulation, there's a new term that they're using for the same thing that they did with the CDOs, and it's called bespoke trench opportunities. So look that term up, because it's going to be seen in the future. But Thank you.
Great. Denise, thank you very much for the information. Joe in Rutherfordton, North Carolina. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Tom. I'm glad to get through to you. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh, where I was born.
I used to get into debates with the DeVos family, but I think that was Dick DeVos's father. I was in a young people's group at a Grand Rapids Christian Reformed Church. And so I'm familiar with the DeVosses and Amway. My dad was a tool and die maker at R.C. Allen, and your dad, I know, was a tool and die maker also.
Yeah.
I just wanted to call to tell you that I have a niece that lives in Detroit, and her husband works for Ford. Of course, they're very happy because Ford is really fighting against this ban on most of the Muslims. But she just wrote me that she found out, evidently, that John McCain is wavering on the issue of Benny DeVos.
Oh, really?
And that she had called his office and got through and talked to them. So I did the same thing. I got through immediately and left a message with them. In fact, I talked to him, a young man, probably an aide, and told him where I was from. I'm from North Carolina, so I didn't say I was from Arizona. But I got right through. So maybe your listeners will hear this.
Okay.
Try calling John McCain's office.
Okay, and his federal office, and that you can get there through the congressional switchboard, which is 202-225-3121. Fascinating. Joe, thanks. I hope you're right. That would be really, really interesting.
to see somebody of the stature of John McCain within the Republican Party say no. I'm skeptical, but I'm curious. Joe, thank you very much. Great to hear from you. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. The Democrats have seized basically control of the floor of the United States Senate. And just a moment ago, it was one of the senators from Washington State who was speaking. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Pretty sure it was Patty Murray. But anyhow, this is interesting. The fight begins. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Eileen in Marion, South Carolina, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Eileen, what's on your mind?
Tom.
Hey.
I'm a longtime Democrat. I've talked to you before. I'm probably repeating myself in some of these things, but I don't think the Democrats are living in reality either. You just had a caller a little bit ago that, someone who said, we got to go with a progressive leader of Democrats. This is the problem. The Democrats rolled out a woman, number one, which is unheard of because we still have a very sexist society. And then she had to go against Russia, the FBI, and she still went above and beyond Trump's votes, the so-called president's votes, by 2.86 million.
Right.
So, I don't think the problem is that we're not progressive. I don't think the problem is that she dropped the ball. I think the problem is that, the Democrats have to, excuse me, I'm a lady, and I don't know if they say this thing, but grow a set or do something to stand up for what they know is right. It's just like they hand it over.
Well, here's the problem, Eileen. You've got some, the progressive Democrats are doing that, and they're doing that in a very outspoken fashion. But the problem is that back in '87, when Bill Clinton and Al Fromm put together the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC, the idea was explicitly, the Boston versus Bilotti decision in 1978, I think it was, made it legal for corporations to throw money at politicians. Prior to that, it had been illegal in a number of states. It was illegal in Massachusetts, which is why it was the First National Bank of Boston versus Bilotti was the case. And that was struck down. And so the revelation was, whoa, wait a minute, we can take money from corporations now? So let's not take it from toxic corporations, like the oil companies. They'll fund the Republicans. We'll take it from white-collar corporations, tech corporations and banks. And the Democratic Party got in bed really deeply with the banksters to the point that Bill Clinton put, Jamie Dimon, major bankers in his administration, major bankers, getting basically everything they wanted, as Bill Black was pointing out. And that branch of the Democratic Party is still dancing to the tune of their funders. And I get it that there are some big states where it takes $10, $20 million to win an election. And, are you going to be able to raise that from individuals? I think, frankly, it's possible. And I think Bernie proved it's possible. But the Democrats, the corporate Democrats, the DLC Democrats, they don't believe that. And they believe that they have to continue doing, they have to maintain good relationships with with Goldman Sachs and Wall Street and all this kind of stuff. And they're afraid to call these people out.
I'd say this, I agree with you. The progressives are making noise now, but it's a little late. If the so-called president had been the one who won by that much of a popular vote, and the so-called president had been cut off at the knees, not only by Russia but by FBI, do you think the Republicans would be sitting back saying, "Oh, you know what? I think we dropped the ball"? Do you think that would be happening?
No, I think there would be hell to pay, and there frankly should be right now. Eileen, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 11 minutes. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Ron in Ruidoso, New Mexico. Am I saying it right, Ron?
Yes, Tom, absolutely.
What's up?
Let me just for a few minutes here. I now live in South Dakota, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I'll tell you what, your continual admonitions about going out and getting involved in democratic politics and making contributions is a waste of time. I have done that and done it and done it and done it. And you get doors slammed in your face. Nobody's going to move. As you probably saw not long ago on the news, we passed here in South Dakota, the voters did, a great anti-lobbying bill, which the legislature then declared an emergency and vetoed. But here is my question to you. I gave a bunch of money to a guy named Henry Red Cloud, and Henry Red Cloud is the great-great-great-grandson of the original Red Cloud. He was running for the Utilities Commission, and he got 25% of the vote. And so the point I'm making to you is that this is a losing proposition. I gave money to everybody. The Democrats were lined up around the block, and I gave money to all of them, and every one of them lost. And all the doors that I contacted got slammed in my face. So here is the thing I want you to contemplate, and you'll jump out of the chair and buck off the saddle at this, but I got to say it anyway. Like marriages, personal relationships, friendships, there is a time when it's just not going to work. And so what I suggest, what I have been thinking about, and I'm not a kook, I'm not a nutball, what I've been thinking about is just dissolving the country. Just dissolve it.
Ron, you're a kook.
It is not, it doesn't look to me possible now with this Trump election that we're going to be able to get past this.
Yeah, the cancer at the core of all this, Ron, is money in politics. And I get it that you were supporting Democratic candidates and you didn't get what you want and you feel, upset and disillusioned. But we've got to get money out of politics, and that means going to move to amend.org and participating with them and getting a constitutional amendment passed that says no, money is not is not free speech, and corporations are not people. Ron, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Ray in Fleetwood, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ray, what's up?
These political people, I'm a Democrat and I like Democrats, but they're too polite. They got to be more aggressive, like Bernie was, like Chris Christie was from New Jersey. People loved him.
Yeah.
Like Donald Trump is. We got to have people that are going to show some backbone and like it is.
I completely agree, Ray, and I'm seeing that out of Bernie. I'm seeing that out of Elizabeth Warren. I'm seeing that out of Kirsten Gillibrand now. I'm seeing that out of Sherrod Brown. It's and of course across in the House of Representatives, the Progressive Caucus, there are a lot of people who are really starting to stand, and well, they have been for a long time, but now the media is starting to give them some attention. And if you want the Democratic Party to be more active, if you want the Democratic Party to be more successful, get inside it. Ray, thank you for the call. Mark in Surprise, Arizona. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. Earlier, you were talking about why do poor communities stay poor? And you talked about 3 prongs, and one was education. You made me think about a Supreme Court case we studied back in school. It was San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez. Are you familiar with this ruling in '73?
I am not.
This was San Antonio had a couple of school districts, poor minority Edgewood, and then rich white Alamo Heights. Young girl felt she was not getting a good education in Edgewood. State divided up the federal school money based on taxes, I believe property taxes.
Mm-hmm. So the richer neighborhoods got more money and the poorer neighborhoods got less.
Exactly. So Rodriguez's case was wealth discrimination, right. 14th Amendment. Lower courts upheld her, upheld Rodriguez, but when it got to the Supreme Court in 70, I think 2 or 3, they ruled in favor of the school district, saying that education was not protected by the Constitution.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'll read it right here off of Wikipedia if I can find this statement. The loss. Okay. Let's see. Supreme Court.
That's all right, Mark. I'll take your word for it. And I've got a bunch of other callers who want to get in here. But
that's. So anyway, the point is that really to fix the schools, and everybody associates the public schools with the federal government, but they're just far removed from the problem. They're just giving money to the states, and the states get to divide up the money as they wish. And a few states since then, it looks like, have filed lawsuits to get fair. One's the Robin Hood, Texas, where that case took place. They have the Robin Hood plan I think it was in the 90s, which was to get some of that money from the rich white neighborhoods into the poor minority neighborhoods for schools. But that's the problem. I mean, right there, in terms of funding in the
that's
schools
amazing.
and the poor communities,
Yeah, that would have been the same court if it was in 73, pretty much the same court. That was the year that, I'm pretty sure 73 was the year that Lewis Paul was put on the court. Might have been 72, but Nixon put him on the court, and that was the court that brought us the Buckley decision in 76. So it's not a surprise, but that's pretty horrible, and that provides a basis for Betsy DeVos's privatization and screw the public schools and take out the teachers unions while you're at it campaign, which is what the Democrats are pushing back against so aggressively right now in the Senate. Mark, thank you for the call. Jack in Bellows Falls, Vermont. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. On the way home today, I heard a man who was very articulate. He was being interviewed on a public radio station, and he was talking about moving to the left of Bernie and Elizabeth Warren is what we need to do to keep to get this progressive agenda really give it a
what does that mean?
In the arm.
Jack?
I don't know. He didn't, and that's the crazy thing. He didn't really articulate that part of it. It was all the same issues of the educational issue, the healthcare issue, and that I think it is more become more aggressive like the Republicans.
Yeah, because Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and basically the progressive wing of the party are right smack dab in the middle of the sweet spot of where America is at. I mean, when you look at the polls, this wasn't public policy polling. This was a Progressive Change Institute back in 2016 did a poll of likely voters, and 79% want the government to negotiate drug prices, 78% free college, 77% free pre-kindergarten, 75% do away with the so-called free trade, 74% end tax loopholes for corporations that ship jobs overseas, 73% end gerrymandering, 71% Medicare for all, 71% of Americans, 71% disclose corporate spending in politics and lobbying, 71% require the NSA to get warrants, 71% giant infrastructure job program. I mean, on and on it goes. Basically, they are where, and Jack, thank you for the call, they are where America is at. So I don't think that you need to go left or right or anything else. I think you just need to take this agenda, move it forward, and say, yes, this is what we stand for. Because all of them, and I'm talking about Republican voters as well as Democratic voters when I give you these percentages, and that's only about 5% of the issues that are over 50% approval among all voters that would be on the list that you would find Bernie or Elizabeth Warren or whatever talking about. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll see you tomorrow, and don't forget, in the meantime, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.